you use the first time? I guess we could start. Okay, we're live now, Noah. Surprise.
All right.
And welcome, everybody. That was my attempt at being fancy. And this is, I always tell people, don't be fancy. Just be regular. Just be right. I was trying to do an obnoxiously long crossfade because I thought it would be funny. But then I accidentally just immediately crossfade multiple times, and then we just ended up live. So, thanks for joining us, folks. Welcome. It's been a hot minute since we had a live stream, just because we've been so busy getting certifications up and running, getting our new Unreal courses up and running. So it's nice to be back. Thanks everybody for joining us. I see everybody up in the chat, so by all means, this is interactive. Get it? But ching. This is an interactive stream. So by all means, ask your questions, throw your comments in the chat. We love kind of having that discussion and extending it beyond just us on this screen to you on your screen. So with that said, we're not going to do a whole big spiel at the beginning here like we always do, because we only have Noah for an hour, because Noah is a busy man. So we wanted to hop right into talking about Python with Noah, because Noah is I know a lot of people who get really into Python. You know, a lot of the high-end pros are really into Python, but I don't know if you take it to the end. I think you take it to the end. Your projects have a lot of external scripts. You got a lot. I mean, most of your projects are extensions. There's probably more extension. There's more lines of code in your TouchDesigner project than most people's open frameworks projects, I'm going to guess. Which I think is a
frameworks.
Sorry?
You might be. I don't know. It's a lot of code. It is a lot.
It's a lot of code, right?
Yeah.
And I see everybody in the chat. Owen, Taco Man, Joaquin's up in here. Thanks for joining us. Rob's here. Thanks everybody for joining us. So Noah, before we get started, do you want to take a quick moment, just introduce yourself for folks who don't know you, tell them a little bit about Hard Work Party, and what you've been up to lately?
Sure. Thanks for having me back, and I hope my connection's okay. Some dicey internet, but yeah, I run the studio called Hard Work Party, and we make digital experiences and installations with complex inner lives, is what I like to say. This project is definitely a reaction to kind of the COVID situation, in that I had been in talks with my good friends at the beloved Brooklyn institutional venue Elsewhere since really the beginning of the lockdown, like in March. I mean, the owners are some of my best friends, so we're always talking anyway, but the conversation immediately turned to like, what does a music venue with a really tight-knit community do, and what do musicians do during COVID? And of course, we saw a lot of the stuff that immediately comes to mind happening immediately, which was like, oh, let's use the techniques of virtual production to create a simulacrum of the experience of seeing music live, all the way down to like a stage, with like fake LED screens on the sides and like a big speaker stack, and like you're an avatar that's like at your normal human scale relative to the stage, and you can move around, and I get that, but I feel like that's pretty well trodden ground. And also I think like during COVID, that is kind of it's missing the opportunity, really. Like people want to get out of their house, out of their real life, out of the world, and have an experience, that's, I think, like a little more fantastical and impossible. And of course, I think like that's the opportunity with all virtual experiences, is kind of like do something that doesn't exist in the world. Like why, to scale, try to recreate something that could exist in the real world, in the virtual world, and use all the same constraints that we have, and not break rules or like do something impossible. So immediately, we did actually start going down a similar path, in that we were talking about doing hour-long music videos in virtual production in Unreal Stack, using Axsymmetry as a compositing layer and camera tracking layer, and doing like really high concept, abstract music videos that are seamless, or maybe that segue back into the green screen and then come back, but track camera, all this for an hour per performance. And Twitch came on and gave us some support, which was really cool. And they were really hands off and just kind of letting us do whatever we wanted. But then, probably 2-3 months into that production, like we had done a bunch of research and a bunch of tooling around it and stuff like that. And I basically had an epiphany. I was like, I don't really know any Unreal developers that don't have full-time jobs. I don't know any. Like I can't find any anywhere. And if our intention is to do an hour music video every month of original Unreal content, like who's going to do that? Like we don't have any money. So like how is that going to happen? You know, so when we got to that point, I was just like, oh, I see. It's got to be me. I have to build the entire thing myself. And of course, then I'm a hammer. And wait, I only have TouchDesigner as my hammer. So
all the problems become nails.
Into a nail. Yeah. And so, okay, well, as a TouchDesigner project, what does this look like? And then we thought, okay, how do we go as fast as possible in the development sense in order to get as many ideas on screen as possible and feel as gonzo and kind of untethered and like out of control as possible in order to make like a really Twitch first shows. We had to be on Twitch, they're our partner. And how we make it really interactive and non-linear, and how do we give people that feeling that they can reach through the screen and poke the talent, and the talent will respond. You know, how do we do all those things in the time frame that we had for no money? You know, because we'd already spent the money on equipment. And also, like 2 weeks before our first episode, Twitch came out and said, "Oh, you got to license your music,"
which has been a huge Twitch situation on its own. Let alone how that affects a music-focused stream.
Yeah, I mean, we had already booked Princess Nokia for her first episode, and we had her playing 12 songs. You know, it's like, oh, okay, so you know, out comes the wallet, and like the whole rest of the budget went that way for the remaining episodes. And so then it was just like I believe that one of the strengths of TouchDesigner is to go like super, super fast and like figure out what you're doing, like Buster Keaton on the front of the train, basically, just like clearing the tracks while you're like riding the cow catcher. And that's pretty much what I did. I just like built this mega large application. It's the biggest thing I've ever built in TouchDesigner. It's huge. Raw.
I'm surprised it runs, to be honest. I'm surprised it runs. Well,
we spec a pretty good machine. The machine has a 3090, and it has and that thing, the VRAM is like getting full sometimes. And
we're not going to have this talk live about GeForce versus Quadro, but
well, we didn't have money for a Quadro. There's no money.
My finger wiggling at the thought of a 3090.
The 3090 with a backup 3070 Super was like what we had, or maybe even like a 2070 Super, I think. Yeah, that's what it was. On our backup box. So I'm glad we never had to fail the backup box, because the backup box became our streaming box. But I built and 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 just kept going as fast as I possibly could, right into show day the first day, and then came back from site after the first show and just kept building straight through the second show. And what it turned into after the first show was me also doing a music video for every song, like a live real-time music video for every song.
Because you make unique content every single show, don't you?
Yeah.
For every song.
Well, every song is its own original animation that goes with it that's audio reactive. And it's actually hands-off. They run themselves because I'm busy
running everything else. Yeah.
Yeah. But the sets and stuff like that we add to the show every time, and we add interactivity every time, and we move our UI around, we change the way the interactions work and stuff like that. And honestly, like it was like we never really had any major bugs on air, but we were building, like we weren't testing, basically. It was just like build just enough time in to like be pencils down at like quarter of, and then like go live. And
which is terrifying.
Yeah, but we designed an aesthetic in the show, and we designed a storyline in the show that were intended to justify problems. So the backstory of the show is that this is a cult on a spaceship that is the second generation of the cult, and the first generation, they've all been born on the ship. The first generation of the cult did something terrible on Earth in the 90s, and they were banished from Earth. Because they had so much influence, they were able to leave in style. So they took this spa ship with them. They're like on an aromatherapy spa, basically. Yeah. But the only part of the ship that is like a spa is the front of house, and that's where the leader lives, this cult leader who's psychotic, who is the second generation leader of the ship, the founder, is frozen. The original person that did this terrible thing and is frozen, and is the charismatic leader that like brought the cult together. He's frozen in cryo, but their child runs the cult now, and their child is also crazy, but like much more loving and
that's
unaware
the
of the kind of
that's the host of the show, which sets it up to be just hilarious from the get-go.
And then what's actually going on is that the ship is crumbling. It's a horrible place to live, but the leader has no idea because they live in the spa part of the ship. But like everyone else is either frozen or in basically like the boiler room of the ship. And there's this immense bureaucratic web of like vendors and professionals and red tape and engineers that work on the ship that are like keeping things nice for the leader. And the leader is like super entitled and on camera. And then off camera, like all the hints that you get is that it's just chaos and like misery, and that they're trying to hide it from the leader because they don't want to complain because they're just grateful to be part of the organization. Yeah. But like that's the kind of premise that justifies why everything's fucked up. And even further, the justification for the communication with Earth is that once a month, a moon moves in a position that allows them to communicate back and forth with Earth and have a cultural exchange in which a musical guest comes aboard and performs for the leader and receives the offerings of the worshipers, and the worshipers on Earth get to worship the leader, and the leader gets to receive their worship and provide them with blessings and stuff like that. And it's got this kind of weird megachurch overtone. And that connection, the show begins and ends with static, and you can actually see that on one of my screens right now. But like, I don't have my controller hooked up.
So we'll get there. I think that's like a pretty great intro to the show, and already like we got a lot of love for the show. Patchy's mentioning they love so many of the different scenes you build. Super nice aesthetic. I think everyone's going to see that in a second once we get into it. And also Patchy's mentioning love the backstory. I wish there was more interactive streams, putting time into the storyline, which I think is a good. It's a good way to think about it. I know we always treat the art part as art, but we never treat the other parts as art. And backstory is just as important as anything else. Now, Patchy also had a good question: is how do you handle interaction for such a wide range of crowd scales? Like your viewer count can vary so widely. And I think maybe that's a good transition into even talking about. So we'll come back to that question, Patchy. But first, I think maybe should I transition to the screen share?
Give me 1 second, because I'm going to pull up the elsewhere interaction spreadsheet. But in the meantime,
I love it. I love spreadsheets. Mamma mia!
Of interactions. Okay, so that's up. You can.
Should I
my screen?
Pop over?
Maybe the UI screen.
Okay, hold on a sec. I gotta. Let's make sure I do this right.
I'm gonna connect this controller. So
the UI screen. Okay, yeah, let's go. We're going. Transition. Dun dun dun.
So
no lie, I almost just hit stop streaming instead of turning off studio mode.
This on fire today.
I gotta be careful with the buttons today. Now I think one of the main reasons why I thought it would be super interesting to talk to you about Python is, as we're gonna talk about how you set up this project, you've really taken, I think, extensions to one of the farthest places I've seen in terms of how much you've used it to really almost do everything in the project that is non-graphical, in a sense, I think. And I think you even push that to, I don't want to say like proper coding. I don't really know what the word is, but you're a really heavy proponent of externalizing a lot of scripts, which is something that I think a lot of people are experimenting with, and maybe getting your kind of 2 cents on that would be really great. Because I think once we switch to the other screen with just VS Code, people will be like, "Oh my God, I've never seen so much Python code in a single project before." So that's kind of the lens that I want to kind of look at stuff through. But by all means, I think give people like a quick little tour of like what this show kind of looks like and how crazy it is.
Sure, yeah. I mean, as you can see from the interface, like I built up a kind of basically an A/B switcher paradigm, but like this is a kind of set of abstractions that helps me be flexible within a set of rules that let me build modules that have an interface that the program understands, but then have internals that maybe break those rules. And I'll give you some examples. But like, of course, I picked sources I put them on a background, and then I can put together a scene that uses two sources. And forgive me for the test footage here because it's all funky, but the cropping is weird and the key's not right and everything. But this is all I got. But I can pick my two sources, my A and my B here. And so if I had like a big A, small B, you can see a little guest, or like big A with a bunch of small B's, whatever. I put together positions and change who's who, right? And then I have these inputs that are like NDI inputs. I have, other NDI cameras out in the space. And I actually originally built this out in order to accommodate a bunch of IP security cameras that we never deployed, but there's infrastructure in here for these IP cameras that we thought were going to be part of the original story and how the show worked. Of course, I can pick backgrounds. These are just assets that my good friends at Dark Igloo made, and they're incredible and like really kind of build the world of the ship. They're actually not necessary for a lot of these looks. So a scene as a concept combines one or more inputs with a background in some kind of rule. So you can say this is an A only scene, this is a background only scene, this is a big A scene, this is a scene with an eye line. It looks weird with that, but if I were to put up the chat, for example, this looks like they're looking at the chat.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
And that could be any source. So I could put up a caller here, I could put up my DJ as the Doge cam, that's originally going to be on a dog. Big A, small B's, big A, small B1, a punch in where we kind of pop in on whoever we're looking at. And then we have, so those are all scenes that I can change the background out on, right? But then I have these scenes that kind of break the rules. So like this is called...
Taco Man is very correct in the chat saying this is crazy. Like it really is like, and that's part of the fun of the show is like what you were saying earlier. You didn't want to ground it in like, oh, let's just make a virtual LED stage. This is like a full, almost world building exercise that is live on Twitch.
Yeah. And we could go into some great detail about the kind of internal struggles with the creative team between myself and my partner on this, and the Igloo guys and the different hosts that we work with on like how you have a show where even though I'm kind of on-air talent, I'm on a microphone during the show as a character who's like
your character. You're also running the thing and designing it. Like you're wearing a lot of hats on this one for sure.
Yeah, but like the host can't edit. The person playing the leader can't edit. We gave them a stream deck at one point, but like it's off camera, and like we thought we might build it into their costume. We just didn't do it. And it's good because they were very overwhelmed anyway. And they have a big screen in front of them. I'll show you what the host screen looks like. This is what the host screen looks like. This is from the end of the last show. So we don't have any subscribers today. In time, you have the guest. You can see the guest down there against the green screen. In the top right is if we do voting, that starts showing up there so they can see the voting really clearly. This is obviously the program feed, and this is messages from me. At the very end of the show, there was some confusion as to whether or not the sound guy had cut the mic. So that's the last message that was up during the last thing. And then the guests have 4 screens as well that are different orientations. But they have 4 TVs around them, one of which is the program feed, which is under the camera. They can see themselves. They can see messages from me. They can see the voting, and they can see the chat. And then... Anyway, so you build up these scenes, right? And then like we have scenes that kind of behave by different rules. And I haven't aligned this test footage, but you can see this with 2 people together or like 1 person. And I can change the background. No, I can't. This always has a texture background under it, which changes by itself. Or I can change it with this method, and this is just random videos. And then we have scenes that don't accept a background at all and always have hard-coded one of the inputs in them, because while originally I built this system to be really general, what I realized was as I'm running the show, if I know the bathroom is going to be the host talking to the guru on Shitter TV here, like the guru shows up, I have a button for this. The guru button. Oh, I didn't load my stream deck from the show. Anyway, this scene in the elevator, like they're taking this freight elevator, and when we cut live, the elevator starts moving. And at a certain point, they're trying to get the orgy. They're trying to go to the orgy. Yeah. And when they get to the orgy, they can't get in, but the bouncer shows up on the TV. Yeah. And I have a button here that throws the bouncer up. Anyway, these scenes, like the debate, we had this cosmic debate in the last episode. And in the debate, here, I'll throw whoa, look at what happened to the key. That's really crazy. Wait, hang on. I got to cut and then throw it full screen. Oh, right. Because this was a mop with sunglasses.
That was a mop,
originally shifted it to be green. But in this scene, I can like this scene just behaves differently than other scenes. It's like a special thing. But they all are within the abstraction of a scene in the way that, like, if I want to make a new scene on the fly, like 10 minutes to the show, I can just copy an existing scene, and as long as it has an out, top, it'll and make a button for it. It's going to work, even though the internals of these scenes have different specifics. And the one that kind of breaks the rules the most is the music looks. And these music looks,
and these are like the music videos, almost the mini music videos.
These are music videos, yeah. And there should be audio playing. So this, obviously, he's running around off his mark, but like it's supposed to be in place. But anyway, these looks, I can change the look that is playing inside of that look. So the music look itself is an A/B switcher with nested scenes inside of it. Which, would I have done that originally? I don't know, but like that's kind of where we ended up because we were moving so quickly. But it's sustainable. Like the whole program, like I have no complaints about the way I built this thing. Like I can still build on it. I never get anxiety when I need to add or change things. Everything is in its right place. Everything's modular. Everything's separated. It looks like a lot, but like everything's a box with almost nothing in it and a Python extension.
Yeah. So I think
except these things make top graphics, and like this is one of my rules. We can talk about philosophy in a second, but like
that's what I want to talk about.
I don't op messes and spaghetti op stuff gives me hives. I freak out.
Yeah.
If I'm going to collaborate with somebody and like they've sent me a sample of what they're working on and it's like a bunch of ops on screen at once, I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever work together. Like that, I can't. Like
10 maybe max, 10, 15 on the screen. That's it.
Yeah. I think I got that from you. Like 10, 15 ops on screen is, but my exception is what I do is I make these sandboxes like the concept of a scene. And in the context of a scene, none of these are that crazy, but like in one of these music looks or whatever, like these music looks are a mess on the inside. They're like, that's the type of mess that you're used to seeing in TouchDesigner. Like it's a complete mess inside these looks, but I don't care because all these looks need to do is make a 1080 raster on the out. Like that's all I need them to do. And what they do inside themselves, like that's when I get to be Jackson Pollock and like get all messy and like make something that's kind of not legible, but like who cares when you're making a long compositing chain, why you like decided to put a thresh on something and then blur it a little bit and then multiply it back in. Like, I don't care. But if you send me a chain that has like a dat to chop and then a math chop and then, a fan and then something else, and like, you don't explain how the hell that works, like, I'm not going to be able to read it under fire. Like, I have to work on this code while I'm playing a character on the show.
Literally.
So like, that's where the Python approach really comes into play, is like, it reads from top to bottom and left to right, in a way where I don't get hives when I'm looking at it.
Yeah. And this is actually an interesting thing, because we got folks in the chat kind of comparing Elsewhere, Dandy Does It, Code Miko, Sushi Dragon, all these different streams that are kind of like pushing the tech front of things. And I think that's been like a super cool thing to see. Like, and especially I think I probably agree with Patchy, like Code Miko and Sushi are probably more on the fun tech demos, whereas Dandy's stream and Elsewhere really feel like more kind of like conceptually based. It feels like more like an actual show that you're going to watch, and there's stuff going on, and more like content focused as opposed to like tech focused, even though all of them have like a total like explosion of tech involved. And I think that's probably like sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say those were, those three were our influences when we started this. We really didn't know a lot about Twitch when we realized we were making a Twitch show. We really had to make a Twitch show. So we started doing our homework on Twitch, and we originally said we wanted to do a show like Sushi, or we wanted to do like Space Ghost or like Public Access 2030, like Eric Andre on Twitch kind of thing. And the project evolved with just some creative voices came in who are a little less inclined to do something gonzo and kind of crazy, and a little more towards the kind of constructive fantasy kind of thing. And when we did that, the third influence that we said we really wanted to look at. Oh, it's funny you say that. No, it was Dandy.
Dandy Stream is awesome, and the folks working on Dandy Stream are super nice, and they're also now in the TouchDesigner community, so that's like super awesome.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they couldn't be any nicer. We reached out to them very early on, and we're like, hey, we're huge fans. Like, can we raid you at the end of our show? Can you, give us a heads up if we're doing something dumb? Like, can you keep an eye out, for what we're doing that's obvious, that we shouldn't be doing, because they are like students of the game more so than whenever I talk to any audience about Twitch, I'm like, you have to watch Dandy. It's the only must-see show on Twitch that like really is completely 100% something new, something different, something that only exists in this context. And they are relentless optimizers and relentless in their pursuit of the like purest expression of what this platform is capable of and what their very, very specific story calls for. Beautiful UX design, beautiful graphics, awesome vibe, great music, all that. But like the way that they're working on the show and evolving it and using incredible amounts of screen time and a big audience to do that is like unparalleled. Like there's nobody can catch up to them doing what they're doing. And like when we started doing that interaction discussion that you were talking about, we had a bunch of instincts that a lot of people have when you first start thinking about how to design interaction for a big group of people or how to do it for Twitch. And we really quickly went like, wait, like, why doesn't Dandy do that? Why does Dandy do this differently? Like, what do they know that we don't? And so we like went back and like looked at how they do everything that they do and tried to extract lessons that we thought we could tell from the outside, like why they're doing what they're doing. And I've had a bunch of conversations with them and they've been really open and helpful with that stuff. But like, I just can't say enough, like how important they are as an influence on how our show works. And like, to whatever extent our interactions succeed or fail, it's because we succeeded or failed at imitating them. But like, they are like the best at this, and I would really recommend you watch that show.
Yeah, it's Dandy Does It, right? That's the name of the full stream.
DANDI Does It, yeah.
And I'll post the name of the channel here for everybody up in the chat. It's a fun show. It's a crazy show.
Yeah, it's like if you turn Chill Wave into like a sci-fi jazzercise show. Like just the vibe of like a certain type of contemporary down tempo. It's a very musical show, and the music selection is very tasty, and like their ethos is pep, positivity, and playfulness. And they have this fun backstory, and they're very, very serious about working the backstory into everything. And yeah, I can't recommend that show enough. So yeah, when it came to our thing, like, which screen are you on right now?
I'm on the UI screen.
Oh, here. If you share my other screen, I just want to really quickly show what our thinking was about. You got that one up?
Yep. I see the spreadsheet. I like spreadsheets.
All right. So yeah, so this is when we really started getting into it, like how do the interactions work on our show? We were thinking on an axis of unobtrusive to disruptive.
For the show or for the viewer?
For interactions with our show.
Okay, cool.
And then on another axis of cheap to expensive, you really only want to be playing in two quadrants: cheap and unobtrusive, and expensive and disruptive.
Wow, that is knowledge bomb right there. That you are not going to find that kind of Twitch interactive analysis. Just think about that. Can you just repeat that? I think that is some real wisdom for anyone doing anything on Twitch. Yeah, and I can rephrase it for you. Imagine an interaction that is very easy to do and totally takes the show off the rails. Yeah. That's why it's what kind of show you're running. No bueno.
But if you're trying to like have a little bit of control over your show
and have a flow to it and like do stuff.
Yeah, you don't want anything in this quadrant. Or if you have things in this quadrant, just be prepared. It's you might want to rate limit it or something, but like it's going to take your show off the rails. Similarly, if you have an interaction that's really expensive to do, meaning like people give you a lot of money to do it, they have to spend a bunch of hard-earned channel points like to do it.
Bits, channel points, tier subs, like stuff like that. Yeah.
But like it doesn't do anything, essentially. Like it could go without anybody noticing it, and the talent on air doesn't say anything about it. Why would they do that? So this area over here... that's the feels bad area. Yeah, you feel used, kind of. Yeah. Totally. But then on these two quadrants, like... this is where things get fun, because this is like people putting all their chips on black, and like tossing a bunch of money at the show,
let me spin this show off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, they want basically, you tapped on the fish tank. The fish should look at you.
Yeah.
Right?
That was my fish expression,
so,
by the
and
way.
then over here, you have the things that are like things that happen in the chat mostly, or like things that groups of people can do that aren't that big a deal, but they can do them anytime they want. And if people just want to push buttons a little bit, they can do this stuff. If they're new to the show, they can be doing this stuff anytime they want. So this is how we were thinking about interaction. And then, of course, we were categorizing them by the different kind of Twitch's like APIs are just bonkers. But like,
yeah, and that's we had a good question just now. Noah, I'm guessing you're using PubSub for Twitch, and maybe that's like
we use APIs, and
you got the WebSockets.
Wait, PubSub is over a WebSocket.
But it's different than because you have the WebSocket IRC gateway for the chat, don't you? Also,
there's IRC on the chat, and then there's two flavors of API that are GET based, and even actually you can put and post. We didn't get that far. We were actually that's what we were working up to is to use the API to change the channel points offerings on the fly depending on where we are in the show. Which is doable over the API. But we were just using the API to get information. For example, in my interface, I can see how many people are watching, which I use to make decisions about the thresholds at which we need a certain number of people to participate in order to
for like voting and stuff like that.
If
right?
those numbers are too low, then those things happen too often. Or if they're too high, they never happen. Yeah, so there's all these different kind of flavors of ways that people can interact with our show. And we're using that as kind of the third dimension on our plot, of like deciding where these things go and then how they actually work. Dandy has a really cool thing that they do. I don't know if other channels do this. I'm not the biggest Twitch head, but like what Dandy does is you accumulate channel points. Like, of course, there's nothing you can do as a channel about how people accumulate channel points. That's just a Twitch thing. But on Dandy's show, when you spend channel points, they immediately refund them. It's automatic. It's like a rule on the channel. So then you can just set that on Twitch. But that means that the number of channel points you have for Dandy's channel is your level. Essentially, it's like your rank as a Dandy viewer.
Oh, interesting.
And instead of our model where like we say, we have some math that we've done where it's like, this person, if they have 1,200 channel points, they probably watched one full episode as a subscriber, or they've watched 2 episodes as a non-subscriber, and they've done a couple interactions. And at that price, you can buy an affirmation or an absolution from the host, which is literally like the show stops and the leader looks into the camera and says your name for 30 seconds and like absolves you of a sin that you specified in the channel points request, or they like tell you you're going to be okay or whatever. But we set that at a price where it's like you would need to be at the end of the first episode as a new subscriber or have watched 2 episodes as a non-subscriber. And the idea is you spend that money. The channel points are typically free.
Yeah, and that's the norm on Twitch is accumulate points, spend on rewards.
Right.
Yeah.
In Dandy's show, basically what's happening, because you continue to accumulate channel points, they can create abilities for loyal viewers that are
interesting.
Way out of reach for anybody who just started watching.
Yeah.
But that loyal viewers can do all they want. So it's like a skill tree.
Yeah, it's like a thresholding. Must have this, must be this tall to trigger this command in channel points.
But at that point, you can do it all you like.
Yeah.
Which is like it's one of the many, many things that's just like super smart.
Yeah, very unique about Dandy's stream. Cool. So I think this is a good point to transition over to, I think, talking a bit more about the specifics of the Python side of things.
I don't think you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you not hear me? Check, mic check. I've heard. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. I don't know.
Okay, cool. That's all good. It happens. I think now is a good kind of transition point to kind of dive into some of that Python stuff and then come back to the Twitch side of things. Because can you show the Visual Studio situation?
Yeah.
I think that is like the perfect segue. And what you're seeing on the left here is all of the external Python files that are used inside the TouchDesigner project. So I guess maybe my first question for you is, why do you find that useful to externalize scripts like that, as opposed to just having them sit inside of TextStats inside of the project?
Yeah. It really comes down to the fact that, like, if I don't do that right out of the gate, I will regret it, because I try to, as I said, keep my networks really simple, and only do things in ops when I have to. And then, for example, let me show you something. So, where is this? It's under commands. This is how, well, actually, this is an extension. Commands extension. So my commands op here only has an extension in it. That's all it is. And of course, it has a global name. It's called commands. This is when I parse out of Twitch. This is where I go. If somebody did a command in the chat, I'm looking at it actually. Let me just get rid of this side. View, editor layout, single. I in here have a dictionary of essentially functions and rules about those functions, whether or not they're rate limited, whether or not they're limited to subscribers only, whether or not they can work when the show's in clean, because I can go to clean mode so that during musical performances we don't interrupt the music, etc. And the first object in the first key value pair in each of these objects, in each of the dictionaries associated with these strings, is a function in here. And each of those functions determines what happens. For example, if somebody types !mosh, right? Somebody types !mosh, that command comes in here, and I get the command and the sender. And I tell myself that I'm parsing that, and then I basically say, if that command is not allowed in clean, and I'm in clean, say in the stream, in the chat, sorry, we're busy. Otherwise, if it's for subs only, and there's sub, and we've cooled down that command, meaning it's not timed out, because some commands I only want to do every 10 minutes or something, because it's just not fun if it happens a bunch, and this goes back to that chart, then I'm going to do it. And what I do is I look in my dictionary here for the function, and I call the function. This is me calling it by putting it in brackets. Wait, is that right? Yeah. I call it, and I pass it. This is me calling it. I pass it the sender's name. And whatever that function is, it's going to be one of these here, is a function here in this extension, every one of which expects a sender. Doesn't necessarily use it, but a lot of functions do, because a lot of functions will acknowledge it in the stream.
Yeah, and the sender being the person in the chat who triggered the command or did this channel points or subbed or something like that.
Yep. But if you look at this code, I mean, think about what this would look like in ops. This whole thing. Think about what this whole thing would look like in ops. But this is the center of a spider web, where this is one of my functions. It's my Twitch function that has an argument. I'm sorry, my Twitch abstraction, which is an argument, a function, send message to stream. I have my ticker, where I can throw text into the buffer for the ticker after the last period that's just off screen, and it'll come through on the ticker. I have my data mosh thing, which is an effect that sits on the final program composite and can fuck up the final program composite on its way out to the screen. And then SFX MIDI, I'll show you another example. This is kind of like a great example of how this is so powerful. I have a, what is it called? RTP MIDI. I mean, freeware application running on the computer.
Oh, it's like a MIDI loopback.
Well, it's network MIDI. So it sends MIDI over IP.
Okay,
it's
cool.
The exact same thing as the Apple audio MIDI setup network pane on Windows. And what I do is I run that here. So I have a network MIDI device. Then we have the sound guy has a Ableton laptop. And what I do is here in this table, I make up mappings where I say, if I call SFX MIDI play sound and I say elevator, that's going to call this MIDI note, this channel. That's it. So this function, again, is a what's it called? Extension. And it has this thing called play sound. And what it does is it looks in that table for the name that I sent it. And then it basically does a little error checking. Otherwise, it just calls MIDI out with that note. But what that means is anywhere in the program, anywhere, I can say play sound Wilhelm. And as long as Wilhelm is in this table, that's that. Look at how simple this thing is. There's nothing here. Like, I have a little bit of logging going on.
Yeah.
But that means anywhere in my program, I can play sounds without worrying about how the mapping works or whatever. And even further, I have this thing where, like, these are all names of scenes. And by default, a scene abstraction, when it goes live, will call SFX MIDI with its own name.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's smart.
So every scene just does that by default.
Here's a couple questions. The chat's blown up, by the way. Literally everyone in chat, myself included, is nice friggin' setup. I wish my patches looked like this. This is like clean, crystal clean, clear project work. So everyone's got some love for you in the chat.
I have the memory of a goldfish, so that's part of why I work this way, is because, like, when I reopen, I haven't looked at this in 3 weeks or something, and, like, I'm not confused when I pop back in, which is good, because otherwise I'll lose
This reminds me of something funny you once said, which was the reason you think I'm good at debugging is because I assume everyone else is stupid. And I think assuming you said that about me. Yeah, me.
Yes.
Yeah, that I'm good at debugging because I assume everyone else is stupid. Yes. And not stupid as in, like, not smart, but, like, human enough to make silly mistakes everywhere.
Yes.
Is probably a better way to put it.
The problem. Yeah.
And I think that's a really good take that you're having, like, this idea of, like, I'm not smart enough myself to remember if I make something complicated. And, you're kind of expressing that, like, I just want this to be so simple that if I come back in 20 minutes, I don't have to relearn, like, this whole spiderweb situation.
Or if I'm freaking out, like, this is a live show and I'm on the mic. And, like, if you're doing an installation, you have 6 months to get ready for it. And you can do whatever you want, I guess. But, like, the more I learn how to program, and I've been programming for a long time, the more I realize that legibility is number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 important things. And, like, maybe the 5th most important thing is, like, compactness in a way, but, like, that almost doesn't matter. Like, there's nothing more important than legibility. If you can read what you're doing, you can debug it, you can add to it, you can maintain it, you can change it. If you can't read what you're doing, and it works now, like, don't ever touch it.
Yeah. Literally hope it never changes.
Yeah.
So here's another good question for you. Moon Mountain was asking, I heard you say you're continuously working on it, but how long did you have to get this up for the first show? Like, essentially, like, how long did it take when you first built this out?
Yeah, I want to say 3 months.
Which is pretty incredible. I think there's a lot of stuff in there. And you guys are seeing most of the front.
I built it up beginning with the UI, actually. I just started, like, because I didn't know what I wanted. And then pretty quickly, like, I think I made, like, 1 or 2 things, and then I was like, oh, I need an A/B switcher. And then I was like, oh, because I used to, before I programmed, be a AV technical director and stuff like that. And so, like, I've used a lot of production switchers, like TriCasters, and Grass Valley switchers and stuff like that. And I'm really familiar with those paradigms of, like, building up scenes and pipping and, like, compositing and stuff like that. So that's why I have this. This is, like, cribbed right off of how a TriCaster works, basically. But then, I had this big empty area, which I titled ambitiously effects at one point, and then realized, like, oh, I have all this other stuff that, like, I mean, this is a whole other discussion, but, like, UI, you set up a paradigm and then immediately you feel like you're in a straitjacket. At least I do. When I'm doing UI, I'll be like, oh, but, like, the thing that I need to do doesn't fit the rule, and now I don't know what. And, like, you had a tutorial where you showed how to do tabs to, like, switch, basically just change the display flag on widgets and or nested containers and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, right, maybe if I just gave myself some tabs, I could breathe again, which totally helped. And then, you could start kind of, the widget system is great for like reflowing stuff and like letting them expand to fill their containers and just kind of like letting it
with the punches essentially,
build itself up. And I got to say, it really is very organic and works really well for me and is like really easy to use live. I wish you didn't hear my mouse clicking during the show or like hear me typing every now and then, but like I've made jokes in character about how the ship runs like Windows 95 and stuff like that. But like I think like from the outside, something like this looks really insane and gargantuan, but it's made out of chunks. Like the show doesn't break if you take out like big chunks of it. It's built brick by brick, which this process with global op names, with
extensions,
and with
for someone who uses extensions so much, the amount of time for someone who uses extensions so much, the amount of times you've blanked on it is really warms my heart. Makes it feel possible, makes it feel possible.
I'm telling you, I have memory of a goldfish. The modularity of it makes it so that I don't panic. And it doesn't. It's not as though it needed to leap out of the womb fully formed. Like I'll show you the signal path. Like I have my inputs, and currently I'm using these test movie files, but like I have parameters for switching. Global parts for switching to my test harness here. I do some garbage matting. We pop back out. These are all my other inputs. It's just all my NDI crap that I'm actually not using. And these have fallbacks where they say, like, if you have an error, you fall back to this dummy thing. Yeah. I pre-process my inputs. This is in Notch. I do my green screen. This goes out, sometimes through a LUT. And then that stuff gets picked into my foregrounds. These are all my foregrounds. And then I have these simple switchers with this foreground thing that, like, if I hit a button in my UI, it picks a different input. It's pretty dumb simple. And of course, there's an A and a B because I have to be able to build two scenes at once. And then if I go to my backgrounds, they work the same way. These are all just movie players, and I just select them. No big deal for my A and my B. And then, or not A and B, but my scene 1, scene 2 are my program and my preview. And then I composite scenes, and this is the thing where like each of these is like an abstraction, or is the scene abstraction that can be really, really simple, where I'm just, it's like an over or whatever. But you notice that if this thing goes live, if it becomes the program scene, then I call SFX MIDI with the name of the background, because these scenes actually don't have a hard-coded background. It's just like a compositing scene. We went through this at the beginning. And so I have these are clones. I have a primary, I have the preview in the program. And then in some funky cases, I have scenes where like I don't want to be running two instances of them at the same time. And in those cases, I make a dummy second scene where it just selects the output of the first scene and still has some of this logic about like firing off the sound if it goes live. And that could be for a bunch of reasons, but a large part of it is like processor overhead, or if the scene has some kind of statefulness that I don't want to be different across two versions of the scene. And then inside the music one, as I said, this is the same paradigm again. I have an A/B switcher, I do these transitions, and then I have these are the music scenes that pick in my audio analysis from another process and pick in my A and B or whatever. And then these are a fucking mess. Like they're a goddamn mess. But like, I don't care, because what comes out is this. Every scene has to have one of these. That's all that matters.
So here's a philosophical question for you. When you're thinking about building a project in TouchDesigner, are you thinking in Python first, and the nodes in the node graph are the auxiliary pieces, whether it's for graphics or like, oh, I don't want to do that in Python, but would you consider that like a fair assessment of kind of like your workflow, which is, especially with how you've structured all of the, I guess this is maybe a better way to ask the question. When you're thinking, I need to add this, do you first make the extension for it and start like fleshing out like it needs to do this, called from here, here, then you go in and make the nodes, or do you make the nodes first and then extensions after? And maybe that's not a better way to ask, but I think it's an interesting, because you're definitely approaching it like when you're talking about the spider web and your command extension, and then the way you have basically all of these extensions for all the different parts of the structure. Like, do you think in Python when you're working in TouchDesigner?
I definitely think in both. So I think of, generally speaking, I'm thinking pretty clearly like object-oriented kind of approach to programming, right? Mm-hmm. So like, if I'm like, oh, the basic structure of this application was built in like day one, in the sense that like this signal path that I'm talking about, how like the image gets built up. The next thing that happens is, of course, an A/B switcher that has a little transition engine in it. And then the final program composite, well, it goes through the effects kind of thing where like these are all things that affect the actual feed. These are the cutting room floor. And then it gets composited up with all the different components. And yes, could these be in GLSL? Yes, but this is a lot easier to reason about, which is why it's built this way. But like, this is the end of the show, basically. And then I build up the things that go to the monitors. So my show begins inputs and inputs pre-processing, and then it goes through building up a scene, and it goes out. Like, that's my show. This is it. Everything else is a freestanding object. And could these be connected with top in out? Yeah. Like, this could all be one node even, because these all kind of share the process of building up the thing. But everything else on here is a freestanding entity that's responsible for doing one thing only. And so once you've built the kind of core structure of your application, you can poke it and prod it and twist it and change it a little bit, but like, it is what it is. It starts with a camera and it ends with a stream. And in between, the things that I want to add, like, late in the game, we were like, oh, like right before the last episode, we were like, we got to add a tooltip thing. So I threw down this base. I built up these kind of tooltip things that, basically tell people like how to use the program, because it's a usability problem that we're constantly working on. And then I did my usual thing of like, I have a transparent constant, and I have a switch that is driven by this reliable, is that what it's called? Dependable parameter called visible. I always use. Of course, in order to have that, I have an extension. The extension does almost nothing. Pretty much all my extensions that make graphics begin with this: show and hide and toggle. And that, of course, just drives this through a filter. So I have a crossfade. Yeah. And this thing basically stops cooking when I have this set to only blend if I'm not on 0 or 1. So this little chunk right here, I'm just going to put all these things together so you see them, is like, this is the core of every top-based thing that I make. It's a visible toggle. And notice that extension, that's all it's in this extension. But in the future, it is very likely that if I only have these two tooltips, right? And like, I can switch them or whatever. But I could definitely see a situation in the future where I want to use a generalized tip layout to put up any old message that occurs to me on the fly, and I maybe want to do it out of my UI or like in dynamic ways in response to user input. All that thing would need to do is change the text in one of these things and then toggle visible. Yeah. And the extension is already in place to do that. Could I do that? Could I have built this without an extension? Absolutely. Like, this thing could just have a custom par for visible on it, and I could change that custom par from another place. But if I wanted to say toggle that custom par, I would need to have toggling logic at the point where I'm doing the calling, right? Mm-hmm. I would need to put that logic probably in multiple places across my application, and I'll show you why that immediately becomes a problem. I have an abstraction called keyboard here. And in my keyboard thing, I have a table for Control-Alt commands, and I have a table for Control-Alt-Shift commands. In here, it's just a lookup, but look at this. This is all shit that my program does, right? I can toggle the punch in on the host or the guest. I can play a gag called the pod laugh, where it's like a laugh track and you see these cryopods. I can peek in on one of the 3 monitors that's connected to my computer. I can play a different sight gag, the exterior of the ship. I can show the bouncer in the elevator. I can change cameras on the debate stage. I can throw the guru up on the shitter TV on the bathroom, etc. And this is all just by hitting Control Alt whatever, but it's actually hitting Stream Deck buttons. This is mostly for the Stream Deck. All these are Stream Deck commands, and then all these are like hacks for my UI and shit like that. But anyway, this is a lot like that commands thing that we looked at. But the point of this is that like my entire application works from this level. I can do everything that my show does from here. And you'll notice that some of these are toggles, right? Like this is the tooltip. I can toggle the offerings on and off, or I can toggle the guru on and off. If I didn't have a toggle abstraction, I would need to have a function either inline here that somehow does toggle code.
Yeah, whether you modulo it or you do if statements or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. But like, if I want to do other stuff when I toggle, like switch off a simulation or like delay or whatever, you know, like all the toggle thing is already there in the extension, and I write it out in plain English, and I'm not like digging through some chop network or chop timer to like a logic and then like a chop execute, which then calls a text dat that loads a mod that like what, like we're fucking 4 ops deep, so I can just toggle something. Like the extension thing, just this is it. Like these kind of the SFX MIDI, my commands, and my keyboard, all three of which sit here at the top of my application here. Commands, channel points is kind of similar in that it like calls things, but like my commands here, this dictionary, it's so legible. And I can, anytime I want to add to this thing, it's so obvious what to do. There's already an interface for it. And similarly, the keyboard thing that we just looked at in the SFX MIDI, wherever it is, this paradigm, like once you've gone this way, you never go back. But the only way that you can do this is if things have extension interfaces that are logical and have functions that make sense and like can be called from afar and like trusted to be an adult with their own execution and or self-contained, etc. And this stuff isn't externalized, but if I was going to externalize, of course, this would really lend itself to collaboration as well.
Yeah. And I think that's probably like a really good way that people can think about it, because from my experience as well, extensions aren't useful if you just dip your toe in. You kind of have to commit to this workflow that you're talking about, which I think is probably going to be the long-term prevailing workflow. This, you know, because we already have a little bit of that before with custom parameters, global op shortcut, you know, custom parameter triggers the button, then inside the button you have a par execute, and then that like runs some extra code. And to your point, that starts to become like, oh, well, I'm already like, I've touched 4 nodes before anything actually like happens. And extensions feel like the way forward with that. And I can speak from my own personal experience, like what I found is every time I try and just use a little bit of extension, that's where I get those feelings of, oh man, this is a lot of overhead and doesn't really add anything. But what I've noticed is the more I try and commit to them and really let them drive a lot of stuff, like exactly what you're saying, being the interface or API for a lot of these components, then it starts to feel like I'm really getting like more bang for buck from that sense. Like, do you feel the same way?
I wouldn't know because I jumped in pretty hard as soon as they
you're committed.
But the evidence that I have really is like, I would be more than happy to give somebody, if I needed help, I would send somebody this application. I wouldn't feel like I'd have to like walk them through it. Like it's got a table of contents, and when you pop in, the story's right there in the top left. I always put my extension in the top left, and everything you need to know is there. If there's nodes, the nodes should be pretty self-explanatory. But like otherwise, like it's right there. Like, you know, if I have an extension, top left, hello. Sometimes I have 2 depending on what I'm doing. But like, here it is. You know what I mean? And every one of my nodes is either really self-explanatory that way, or like has a couple of ops in it. But like those should be really self-explanatory too. I mean, look at my OnStart here. This is actually just priming up some like face tracking shit in Notch that I'm not even using, but like all this stuff reads in plain English. You know what I mean? Like I don't have it. There's no skeletons in the closet, except in those scenes. But like, I wouldn't ask somebody to like debug I actually have asked Landon to help me, like, why is my screen space reflections not working or whatever, but like, it's a different story. But like, as far as the function of this application goes, like I could collaborate with somebody on this tomorrow, because what I could do is make their base, create an extension in it, give it a global op name, and then write out the headers of their extensions with a bunch of passes in it, a bunch of functions with pass underneath them, and say, like,
just to block
fill
it out,
these things, do what you gotta do. I made you a custom par that's the resolution. Make sure that the out top is at that resolution. I put a fit there for the moment. Give me my pixels, or like whatever it is, And if they need to interact with the rest of my program, I can say, oh, just throw this line in there. That'll do it.
So I don't, we said we're going to only keep you for an hour. So I have one final question for you. What's your biggest Python-related feature request in TouchDesigner right now? What's the thing that gives you the most? You're like, oh, I wish this was slightly different.
That's a really good question. I don't know. I'm not really chafing at the Python part of it.
Do you know which part I chafe?
What's that?
Creation.
Op creation?
No, extension creation.
Oh.
I thought you basically there's the one way you do it, and it has so much extra boilerplate code that you have to go in and delete. I wish we could get it to
I can never remember how to instantiate a dependable stored parameter.
Yeah.
So I just keep it in there and comment it out, and because otherwise I got to go looking for it. Or make one that I throw away, and then I have to make one and then delete it and rip it out, which is a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
But actually, I wish there was a button that would create an extension and externalize it in one click. That would be really nice, because I immediately externalize it, and it goes in my DAT folder, the name of the op that contains it with the ext on the end of it. Like all my things look like Steam Bath extension, Steam extension, Steam Geometry extension, ticker extension, texture extension, tip extension. I just wanted to just do that. You see, I keep all this stuff in here because I can never remember how it works. So like,
and we'll talk for folks who are going to stick around, folks, because we're going to, now that you've had your mind blown, we're going to go into a couple of simpler stuff. I'm going to talk about some tricks. We'll be taking a lot of questions, so don't leave anywhere. I would say my one feature request would be, what I really love about mats, and you're working with like a GLSL mat, is, sorry, not when you're working with a GLSL mat, when you're working with another mat like a PBR or a Fong, and you kind of set it up, you assign all your maps, and you hit that output shader button, and you're like, bam, here it is. I don't know how it would work, but I wish there was some way of doing that with an extension with custom parameters to give you callbacks, like automatically generate callbacks and set up your extension, and maybe have a couple of default boilerplates that you can pick from. I feel like that would be super hype for a lot of people, just to be able to say, I've made a couple custom parameters, generate callbacks, no boilerplate, clean init, and then boom, like right there you are, right there, ready to roll.
Didn't they just do that for, why did I just type mat to search the mats? I feel like they just did that for the vectors, right? Like, don't they have a thing now in mats where like you can define a vector like hue, color, and then there like a button?
I think they made the error. I don't know if they put a button to automatically throw it in there, but I think they made the error. Oh wow, look at that! Really? Does that do stuff?
Nope. But I think that's what it's supposed to do. Or maybe if I put it in here, let me see. If I say example uniform, and then if I hit load uniform names, we'll put it here? Nope. Okay. Well,
maybe work in progress, but step in the right direction. Step in the right direction.
Was that type of thing? Yeah.
Yeah. So, my friend, with that said, I don't want to keep you longer than we promised.
I don't know. Does anybody have any questions? I could stick around for like 10 minutes. I just gotta.
Okay, so here we go in the chat. So I've been keeping track, chat. Don't worry. I know I haven't pulled in everyone's questions. I'm keeping track of them because I'll answer a bunch of them. But if you do have a specific question for Noah, actually, and a good question, when's the next show? Feel free to plug, and I'll put a link to Elsewhere's Twitch here.
I appreciate it. We need a sponsor. We're on hold right now, pending like getting somebody to pay for the next episodes or two. We were supposed to be doing Baby Storm at the end of April, but Twitch didn't renew our contract.
Oh no.
Which I understand. They're starting up big contracts with like Gallery and stuff like that. But yeah, we need a sponsor. So
if you're in the chat and you have money.
Yeah, White Castle, hit me up.
Yeah.
You know.
And I just put the Elsewhere Twitch stream link in the chat for you folks.
Flamin' Hot 3D. Yeah, check out episode 3. That was our best episode. Of course, we're getting better as we go. But that was featuring Murray Hill as the leader. And
that was a very funny one. Murray was very funny.
And Paperboy Love Prince was a very interesting guest. They are running for mayor in New York, and they're quite a character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of thanks. Everyone's sending love. I put your link also for... Hey, you know what's really funny? So I'm using this chat aggregator that like brings YouTube and Twitch chat together. And when I put a Twitch chat into the YouTube chat, it refused my chat message.
Twitch chat? Huh. Oh, yeah.
So I tried to put a... I'm going to try again. I'm going to get rid of the HTTPS. Maybe that'll fool them.
Yeah.
That one, okay. Twitch.tv/elsewhere. You can check that out for sure.
Nice.
So thank you, my friend, for joining us. It's a pleasure looking at your work, as always. It's always super high-end, super professional, super thoughtful. I think it's always like a really cool thing about looking at your work. And thanks for sharing so much with the community.
Thanks for having me. There's a bunch of Elbers in this application too. I always got to say, like, you know, probably good 5-10% of the hardest problems that I have to solve, I just hit Elbers up. He fixes it for me.
And that's when I pretend that, and that's when I pretend other people are dumb. we fix those problems.
Me or derivative. You're like, if this was broken in the most subtle and
in the silliest way possible, what would it be?
Literally like clicking every parameter in something in sequence, just on and off.
Like bypass. Does that fix it? Like cut and paste. Does that fix it?
I never would have done that. Unbelievable.
That's what happens when you use software for a really long time. You really get into the subtle mind.
The kick it. You have a kick it response.
Yeah.
Let me see this one, I think if I whack it on the top left corner, it'll.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much for having us, or for joining us, my friend. And we'll see you on the next one. So, folks, stick around for a sec. I'm just going to reorient the screen as I take Noah out of here and say goodbye, and we'll be right back.
Later.
Welcome back. That was a quick BRB. Okay, so folks, we got a lot of questions that I was collecting in the chat. We're going to go through those. We're going to talk about extensions a little bit more. I'm going to show you some simple stuff, a couple tricks that I found very helpful. So we still got a lot of fun to go for the next hour. So before I do that, one thing that I think is very cool, and one of the reasons why we're even talking about Python today, is the HQ has just released a Python certification. And if you haven't heard of our certification programs, let me take you a little bit behind the scenes here. Let me get my screen sharing operation up and running. We're very excited to launch these certifications because, you know, a common thing that we see with our industry is talent, artists, developers always have trouble representing their skills in a kind of meaningful way when applying for gigs, applying for jobs and things like this. And on the other side, you know, if you're an employer, one of the toughest things you can do is hire a TouchDesigner artist, which literally could be anything. It could be an architect you're hiring, it could be a sound designer you're hiring, it could be a graphic designer. You have like no idea. So to try and help bridge that gap, the HQ has developed certification programs for TouchDesigner so far, and you know we'll be releasing some other very cool certifications in the soon future. And the one we released a couple months ago was the TouchDesigner Operation Foundations, which is kind of like a really great place if you're just starting your TouchDesigner journey. Going there and proving, hey, listen, I know how to like open TouchDesigner. I understand the foundations of this node-based programming language. I might not be able to like, you know, replicate Noah's VS Code setup, but I know how to use this. I'd be a great addition to a team. And what we're really excited to launch this week is, actually, yeah, because we launched it on Monday, I believe, is our Python Mastery certification. Now this one's a little bit different because our Operation Foundations was like, this is Foundations, whereas this is a Python Mastery. So this goes through everything from what is object-oriented programming, how to do everything in TouchDesigner with Python, building into extensions, dependability, really like the full spectrum of using TouchDesigner and Python at a really high level, like the way Noah's been doing there. So I'll give you guys a quick little show of that. And also, if you guys haven't seen the HQ Pro before, I think you might like it. I think you might like what you see here. Look at that. First we get the da, da, da. I should host a ballet of myself one time where I'm like all of the dancers. That would be hilarious. Okay, back on track though. If you've never heard of the HQ Pro, that's our kind of paid mastermind group where we do a lot of our trainings, where myself, Matthew Reagan, folks like Noah, and everybody are teachers inside of our class. And if you come down here, obviously we got tons of video course and training. If you have not seen the HQ Pro before, your mind might be a little bit blown by how many courses we got. Everything from beginner stuff, GLSL particles, DMX, virtual production audio analysis. We just started teaching Unreal Engine as well, so your intro to Unreal, getting up and running with Unreal and TouchDesigner integrations, we got those. Everything from Ableton integrations, Notch integrations, how to spec a PC for our industry, which is something a lot of people always ask about. How to use the wiki, getting into the basics of GLSL if you've never done it, post-processing and rendering. We got courses, literally there's like pages of courses here. Pages of courses. Everything, industry contract fundamentals. That's probably my favorite one. I literally open Google Docs and we read through contracts together and I explain every single line of NDAs, SLAs, SOWs. I love that stuff. I love it. But regardless, so with those, we now have our certification programs. And the certification programs are super hype because what they do is they provide you with a really clear learning path to achieve some of those goals. So for example, for the Python Mastery, you've got 10 hours of materials here that you go through, how to control operators, creating Python triggers, getting into control flow. And I'll say one of the really great things about this is it assumes that you literally haven't done Python before in your life. Starts even from the beginning of explaining what are variables, what's an int, what's a float, and then really quickly builds you all the way up to building extensions, using arguments, list comprehensions, Python storage. You see, like it goes on for a while. And at the end of it, actually, you get to make a really cool component, which is a totally flexible and powerful preset manager for any kind of TouchDesigner operator or component that you might have. Then you get to the end of it, and in the nature of a true certification, there's actually a exam that we've built. And this exam, I can't show you the exam because then you'd all see the questions and be able to look them up before you start. But it's actually a 2-hour exam. It's got a big chunk of it that's a theory portion in which you're answering questions about, you know, what's this, what's not good, what's the right one, what's wrong. And then there's a practical portion at the end where you actually have to build something, you submit it to us, our teachers kind of review it for a pass or fail based on whether you met the specific criteria. And then you have that nice certification. And what's really cool is for the certifications, we leaned into open badges. So if you've ever done anything on Udemy or Udacity or any of these kind of online learning platforms where you get that digital badge that you can kind of embed on your LinkedIn or embed on your social media, our badges are fully compliant with those. So you can embed them into your LinkedIn, you can embed them into your CV or any other kind of online portfolio quickly and easily. So we think that is a super cool thing. If you want to check out our certifications, and actually if I go back to the certification, you can see a list of kind of all the upcoming ones that we have here. We got GLSL certification, management certification, architecture, content inputs, integrations. We got a lot of them coming out. Right now, the 2 that are live, Operation Foundations and Python Mastery. And these are only available to HQ Pro members. And if you haven't heard about the HQ Pro, let me hit you with this link real quick. We have a 7-day free trial, so you can hop in there without paying a single dime. And you can take a look at all the good stuff that we got. We got a Facebook group where we're answering questions every day. We got the certifications. You can make a profile on our job board, tools. There's stuff for days. And actually, I just realized I'm screen sharing on a computer that doesn't have the chat open, so I'm retyping this real quick for you. Let me post this in the chat. And let me just make sure that link is actually like the right link. Is the right link? It's the right link. So I think it's heavily recommended, especially if you're serious about getting into TouchDesigner. Check out the HQ Pro. We definitely have one of the most comprehensive libraries of content, and we make sure that you're not just left alone with the content. You know, you have the content, and then you have the personal support from folks like myself and Matthew to help you on your Python journey, or not your Python, well, Python journey, but also TouchDesigner journey. So, thanks for listening to that little shill moment here. Got to have one of those on these kind of streams. So let me go back here, and there was a bunch of questions. Oh yeah, and sign up for our newsletter. Newsletter is free. We do one YouTube video every week and one new blog post every week. Folks can definitely hop in and just you know, grab those free resources weekly. So, you know, hopefully those are useful. We're trying to mix those up as well. Starting to do more Unreal YouTube videos. We got the TouchDesigner ones. We got some Notch ones. Blog post is anything and everything related to our industry, whether it's Python stuff, TouchDesigner, Unreal, or even just general kind of you know, how to operate as a freelancer, how to charge your clients, like all that kind of stuff we have in our blog. So by all means, hop over there and check it out. Whew. I need a drink after one of those. Patchy's mentioning, I love when they talk more about the industry and non-technical aspects of the work. Hard to find that stuff around. Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I talk about stuff like that. How much you should be charging, what rates are like around the world. You know, been in this business for a while, so I'm always happy to share whatever I know. Classy water, I know, it's very classy. It's not normal, it's very classy. The bubbles, I enjoy the bubbles. So let me scroll back up here and grab some of these questions. Let's see here. And then I'll show you a couple of fun tricks that I've been using in terms of extensions and kind of all these good stuff. So let's see. Joaquin was asking earlier, would you say for logic use extensions and for visual parts use operators? I think it really depends. I'm still on the fence. You know, I've been using extensions for more complicated logic, but I still love having a couple of chops in there, whether it's logic, chops, filters. I still like doing a lot of stuff on the chop side of things. I think that's going to be a personal choice for how comfortable people are working in Python. I think Noah comes from the type of personality who has a lot of confidence in Python and who really like says, you know what, I can like make these really long Python things and be able to essentially like visualize and understand the control flow, where I'm kind of from the camp of, you know, I also don't think Noah came from a coding background either, like similar to us, but I find that I have to balance that out a bit because I don't really, you know, I like using TouchDesigner because it isn't coding. If I wanted to code, I would probably just go over to Open Frameworks and just like dump everything into C++. So I still try and balance it out, but the reality of a lot of these state machines that you got to build and show control systems is there's like a lot going on, and this is checking that, which is checking this and checking that. And I've definitely been moving more of that stuff into extensions as opposed to just having kind of these stray scripts around. And Procchoy, yo Colin, what's up, bro? Was asking, what system are you using for custom par callbacks? I think that was in reference to what I was saying. Is that in reference to what I was saying earlier? I just use par execute that once I throw, you know, custom pars on something, but I don't really like that. I wish there was something a little bit more native than, I guess that's pretty native, but a native in the sense that it integrates with the extension. Because now it feels like you always need an extension, and then you always need a par execute that basically like reroutes your custom parameters into calling things that you wanted in the extension, which I find a little bit kind of just feels like an extra operator for no reason. What do we got here? Steve-O is saying, after a few months of TouchDesigner, I got the feeling that Python will become incredibly useful, but I had no real idea how this could look in a future setup. Today is already very helpful to show me the goal because I just knew the direction so far. Yeah, it's always great. And you know what? I would say a really good thing you can also do is hop on GitHub, do a search for TouchDesigner, and look at some people's bigger projects. So what I mean by that is not looking for, and actually maybe I could share my screen and show a couple examples, because I think really where the benefit of strong Python comes into play is once you have to build an application, like more than just a component, but an application. So actually, let me hop in here, main live. Y'all can see my screen. Let's hop for some TouchDesigner. Obviously, Matthew and David's examples are incredible. So what I would consider not good examples, like don't go looking for Python skills in stuff like a fluid sim example, or maybe a ray marching example might have it, but those are really going to be focused on graphics, probably on nodes, GLSL. What I would say is start looking at things like this, like Richard's Simple Mixer, or I know Lucas just released GeoPix. Congrats, Lucas. Would love to have. I'll hit you up on email. We'll have you on the show to do like a nice dive into GeoPix. But that's like a great thing to look at because these are more than just small components, and they're going to have a lot of logic and state control, and those are things that are going to really be interesting for you guys to look at if you're just kind of getting into Python and you're not really sure where it ends up eventually. Those are really good things to look at. So let me see here. Next episode of Show Patchy, I'm not sure, but the recordings are up there, so definitely go check those out. They're a real fun time, especially the last one was really good. Oh, and Patchy, you have something running on your... You have a mushroom experiment running on your channel. Do you want, Patchy, you want to post a link to that in the Twitch chat? And I'll cross-post it over to the YouTube chat for folks. And maybe we'll raid you after this. If it's still live, we'll make that happen. Just remind me. What do we got here? What do we got? Question. Scrolling. Oh, you did link it. Great. Okay, great. Yeah, twitch.tv/Patchy Projects. I'll post that on the YouTube chat as well for you folks. Definitely check out Patchy's work. Very similar in vein, I would say, Patchy, right? Like really creative, not your run-of-the-mill type of content, which is always fun to see. Okay, I'm almost caught up with chat. Can you do a basic run through of what an extension is? Absolutely. That's coming up right now after this. True Fiasco actually asked a good question, which I'll answer now before we dive back into TouchDesigner and look at stuff there, which was, you know, how does an amateur developer break into the professional space? Especially as a TouchDesigner developer, it might seem like a real crazy thing to do. I think there is... I'd consider almost two paths. And what I'd also suggest is, have you checked out the talk I did at the summit, last summit? So it was the Berlin summit, you know, I think it was called How to Make a Living with TouchDesigner. I can find it on YouTube right quick. So I tried to make that talk as practical as humanly possible. Because I find this is the challenge with a lot of people who you might see giving like a career advice. It's always so abstract. It's always like, oh, like, and then, and it's like, it's literally is like not how we need specifics. So I think that's like a really good place to start with that video. And I would say the best thing to do is be open about what your skill level is and try to go somewhere and learn with somebody. And this is obviously going to be harder depending on where you live because maybe there isn't a huge density of TouchDesigner folks there. At least now with COVID, you know, one of the benefits has been like remote kind of has opened up hugely. So even people that weren't remote before are willing to work with remote people now. And I think that's probably one of the best things you could do is find a company that already has TouchDesigner folks on it. Really try and engage in the community because I think that's where you're going to get a lot of bang for buck, especially when you're starting out, is essentially just being somebody's assistant developer. Because I think there is a road you could take where, you know, you're just starting your career and you're always doing solo projects yourself and they kind of grow and grow in complexity. But I think one of the challenging things now is that, you know, after 10 years of folks doing that, like me and other folks who are kind of more on the senior side of the industry, is a lot of the projects are now always complicated. Like from the start, there's like, I find it hard to find simple projects anymore. So I think that's why one of the nice things is if you can kind of tag team with somebody who kind of becomes your mentor in a sense, that is a really good way not only to learn in a controlled environment, but also pick up maybe some best practices from them that aren't the typical types of things you're going to see. And then I think the big thing is just figuring out where you want to end up, because I think where you want to end up should define where you start. So for example, if you want to end up working at a place like Moment Factory, or you want to end up working in something, you know, like Obscura, now Obscura's MSG, but you know, if you want to end up working at one of those bigger companies where they got lots of money to throw in these like crazy big mega projects and doing lots of R&D, I think then your best bet is to actually just start working for a smaller company. You know, find a company that, whether it's an agency or whether it's another shop like Moment Factory, they're hiring interns, or any of these kind of shops. You know, start at the bottom of one of those pegs. Is it pegs? Ladders. Start at one of the bottom of those ladders. Because for somebody in that position hiring at like Moment Factory, what's going to be really valuable for them is to see somebody who has had a job. Which sounds like a weird thing, but as a freelance, you know, it's almost like the way credit is checked. You know, when you go to get a loan, and if you had if you've been self-employed forever, they almost like don't count it as having real money. And I think that's like kind of similar way to approach it, where if you've been a freelancer your whole life and then you want to go get a job at Moment Factory, you better hope that like your freelance career exploded and you're well known enough that your well-knownness is what carries you to the job, because essentially you have very little work experience in a corporate structure, in a hierarchy. And those are things I think, like, if two people go for the same job with relatively similar skill sets, if one of them was a freelancer their whole life and one of them was working at companies their whole life as like an actual employee, I think the employee one's probably going to get the job, more than likely. And I see a lot of folks in the chat talking about other alternatives. You know, live streaming is a great playground for testing and experimentation. I agree. There's like lots of folks doing fun live stream stuff, and it kind of puts the microscope on you, which is a nice feeling to have. For simple projects, Amazing Robot and Sons is saying try local events, music or art. Find some art funding type of projects. Those are great too. You know, True Fiasco saying I had 4 big paid gigs at music festivals for 2020, but COVID, that's really unfortunate. We're sorry to hear about that. And I think you could kind of iterate with a lot of the same stuff going on, like, because I even know folks now, and you know, folks who work with me one-on-one, like, one of the things I always tell them is you got to hit the pavement. That's like what it's about. It's a numbers game. You just have to go door to door and say, hey, do you want something cool that's interactive? I mean, don't literally say those words, because it's not like a good sales pitch, but you go in, you do the pitch, you talk to them, you meet the owners of the local brewery or the local bar or the local insurance company, or, you know, etc. Whoever. You just gotta, you think about cheap ideas that you could give them that you would enjoy. And a lot of time, like, this might even be just something simple like projection mapping a window for the store. They'll think that's super cool. They're like, oh my god, no one's ever like come and offered us this. And as long as you make it reasonably affordable for them, or free in that case, like if you're just trying to build a portfolio, if you're at that stage, just do it for free. Those kind of things quickly build up. Let's see what else we got here in the chat. Yeah, and Patchy's got a really good point. Look, like, get into the community, start looking at all the projects that you see who's the people that are making them. There's a lot of studios out there doing TouchDesigner stuff these days. And I would say another good place to check is our job site, which is jobs.interactiveimmersive.io. Let me share my screen again here. Because what you'll see immediately is, like, if you go, and this is just jobs.interactiveimmersive.io. Here, let me drop it in here. Jobs.interactiveimmersive.io. You would be surprised how many jobs are posted right now. Like, there are a lot of people needing people like us. Now, that not every single one is obviously going to be a TouchDesigner one. That's the word I was looking for. You can see here we got Unity developers, sound designers, but there's going to be a lot of TouchDesigner ones. The nice thing is, because we built this platform like specifically for our industry, really easy to scope out here. Let me just see the TouchDesigner ones. And you'll see, like, there's quite a bit of jobs posted in like the last couple days, last 2 weeks, last 3 weeks, last month. So it's always good to just keep an eye here. And then what you can do is, even if you find that you don't qualify for a position, what you can do is, similar to what Patchy was saying, think about like, oh yeah, you know what, this company is in our space. So maybe this isn't the job for me, but let me go to their website. Let me just send them a quick email, introduce myself. Hey, do you have, you know, a position at this level, you know, wherever your level is. So maybe if you're kind of starting out, maybe you're like, hey, do you have any internship opportunities? maybe if you're in the intermediate part of your career, you can ask like, hey, I saw you had that job. I don't quite qualify for that one, but I really love to work with you. Start doing that kind of thing really can get you far in a short amount of time for sure. Okay, so what do we got here? Okay, so I think let's transition back to Python. I think I got most of the questions. If I didn't get your question, by the way, just put it wherever the chat is. I have no idea. I think it's over here. I'm guessing it's over here. If the chat's over here, re-put your question in the chat, and I'll try and bring it up. But let me talk a little bit about Python, because I think this is what's really interesting, is especially this idea of extensions. And if you've never used extensions, we can kind of like get into it a little bit. Let me open up TouchDesigner here. And then there's two kind of really interesting tricks that I shouldn't say tricks, not tricks, they're just kind of use cases for extensions that I found to be really helpful lately. Da 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 da. TouchDesigner. Let me take a quick sip here. And you know what? I was literally about to do the thing where I just start working, but the timeline's not moving. So, you know, I'm going to make sure my timeline's moving first. So if you've never used extensions before, a good way to think about it is just Python with more structure. Because that's essentially what it is. And I guess I don't need this because no one's talking to me anymore. Ears are getting hot. So normally we think about Python and TouchDesigner as kind of being these loose kind of scribbles of stuff around the screen, right? You might have like a print statement here, and then maybe like another text that's somewhere else in the project, and that's doing something else. And these are kind of standalone. Colin, I'm going to get back to your comment in a second, but these are kind of like standalone Python scripts. And you know, everyone just calls these Python scripts or expressions, that kind of stuff. Now, what happens is as you find that your projects start to become a bit more complex, or I think that's probably the best case. Your projects start to become a bit more complex, or you're trying to implement some functionality that's a little bit more complex than what you might want to do in a tech stat. You're going to find that extensions really pick up where that stops, in that they offer a lot of structure to how you can build your code. They offer a lot of reusability because then multiple different elements of your project can use that same code to add functionality. They're really good because they give you native access to running those scripts. And I think that was a really good example that Noah was showing, was this idea that, if I had two kind of black box containers, you could use containers bases. There's a tiny bit of overhead with containers, but it's so minimal, it doesn't even matter. But let's say we got one container here, and this has, a text dat in it to do something like run. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to print running number 1 here. And then let's say container 2's got a similar thing, and it's got running a run script of some sort. Now, if we needed to kind of get container 1 to run container 2, without that kind of native access of extensions, what you end up doing is really just creating these really annoying kind of other script that's like, okay, well now I need to go to op and then like // container 2 / run. You do this a lot. Now, obviously some of you may be thinking, oh, okay, well, global op shortcuts, it really makes that better. It does, so if I put a global op shortcut on this called maybe NO2 for number 2, I could, maybe reduce a little bit of this by saying, okay, well, op.no2, and then inside of that, look for op.run.run. How many times I said dot made it really awkward in my mouth to just say dot. It's my nitrous oxide build here. And that starts to really, the more complex your project becomes, the more kind of dense this becomes, the harder it becomes to trace. And extensions really offers a little bit of that more native access, which we'll get to in a second. And I will say, Colin was mentioning 30 FPS. I think it's time to step it up to 60. Yo, I use a computer my laptop is literally 5 years old. What do we got here? i7 6700 2.6 gigs. I got a lot of RAM though because I just found RAM. And what is this? A 970? I think it's a 970M. Let's see what GeForce has to say about this. $970M. So this machine doing OBS, running touch, running a bunch of machine is doing wonders right now. That's why I can also run a lot of stuff at 60. But I digress. So let me take a couple chat questions here real quick. Yeah, what Amazing Robot and Sun said is really true. You know, working at a company also really helps you figure out where the scale is of stuff. Because you might think something's worth like $2,500, you know, $2,000. Oh, that's a lot of money for me to do something simple. And then you quickly realize that normal companies charge $20,000 to $40,000, and that's normal and expected. That's so true. Let me see here. Oh yeah, and you're mentioning sometime I'd love to talk to you about getting paid hourly versus value-based pricing. The better you get at something, the faster you get. Hourly is not a good measure for pricing. It's an interesting one. I'll definitely touch on that for a few minutes at the end of the stream. So let's talk about extensions then. So let's say you want to redo this with extensions. You know, if you're just getting started with extensions, one of the best things you can do is just use the little helper tools that help you make extensions. So for example, if I have this container and I want to give it an extension, right click on it, go to customize component here. And then this place you probably are very familiar with because this is where we build our custom parameters. Maybe you didn't see that there's a little extension code section here. We'll drop that down. Now we do have a lot of options, but let me tell you, the nice thing is we don't need to worry about a lot of them. We just have to give our extension a name. So let me give this just a simple name like runner. Hit add, and then with all intent and purposes, obviously you could do a lot more stuff, but your extension is made now. And you'll see if you go to the extension page of parameters, you know, you got the reference here, it's promoted by default. We're gonna go inside of our container. We've got this kind of runner script, we can edit that. And we're gonna see, and this is the boilerplate I was telling Noah about, that I basically like delete every time I come in here. I basically have like delete the second half, delete the top half. Yeah, and as iBeefalone is saying, if you didn't know that there was a little thing there, you always typed everything in manually and made this script yourself and made, you know, typed in class runner, set up your init. This is so much faster. So then usually what I do is I just come ahead here and basically like delete everything except I'll leave self.ownercomp equals ownercomp. And then if we were going to do something similar that we did before, really what we're doing is we're adding functionality to the class, and then this class is getting treated as if it's a native class of that operator. So what I might do is instead of saying, okay, well I have this script called run, maybe I'll make a function called run here. So I can say def run, and I put a capital here, and this is something you'll find out as you get more and more into extensions. If something is promoted, and you can think about promoted as just basically being publicly accessible more easily, it has to start with a capital letter if it's a function or an attribute. And if it's a lowercase, then you're essentially treating it like an internal function that you're using, not one that's going to be grabbed from the outside generally. So if I say def run, and I'm going to feed self, and we'll talk about self a little bit. Self is basically just like a reference to me, because you know when you start getting into extensions, having a knowledge of object-oriented programming really helps, just so that you know kind of the way people are thinking about it. Not that we're specifically, I mean, we are doing object-oriented programming, but not to the extent that maybe somebody might be doing it in C++ if they're making an app or something like that. Now, self in this case is a reference to the instance of it. I don't want to get too much into the weeds about like object-oriented programming, classes and instances, but just imagine that feeding self is useful because then when you start reusing the same code, let's say I make an extension and I actually tell 3 components, hey, all 3 of you use the same extension code because it, you know, it's 3 video players or it's 3 generative scenes where you want to just change the parameters on. The nice thing about having something like this self that you always pass in means that the extension code as it's used for each one of those, you know, 3 movie players, I can say, oh, well, when I run it on the third one, it knows it's running on the third one because it's been instanced, it knows itself. And that's kind of the idea behind self in like the practical kind of understanding of it. But what I can do is say, you know, print running number 1 here and save that. And the nice thing becomes this native access is that if I'm in number 2 and let's say I want to run, you know, this new run function that I developed here. First, I'll give myself a little global op shortcut. I'll call this number 1. But what I can do is really simply just say, hey, you know what? op.number1.run. And you can see if I run that, I am getting this run. So that's why I think, you know, a lot of people have trouble getting into extensions because, you know, you think obviously like, oh, this is nice, but the other way wasn't so bad. Or, you know, you think, oh, well, having like everything in one script might be good, but it's not so bad having more scripts. I think a good way to think about it, and this was kind of what we were talking to Noah about, is approaching it as a holistic gain. So all of these things are getting added together. You know, the more native access to stuff, easier to kind of work in a code editor because you're not constantly switching between tabs. You get to reuse a lot of functionality. So if I built, you know, for example, I'm even talking about building 2 things here. These are 2 things. I can literally just have one extension script. Both of them load the same extension script. And now I have 2 instances of some higher level functionality that I built. Now, folks, let me know in the chat if this is making sense so far, or if you have any specific questions kind of about what I'm talking about here with extensions, because I don't want to focus too much on the ground level of extensions, because I think there's a lot of really good resources out there. Probably some examples would be on Matthew's website. I believe he has a very great, how do we get into here? Python, yeah, there it is, Python. Oh my gosh, but there it is. And I believe he has a great set of posts. If you go here and start looking around, you're definitely going to find them. That's a great resource for it. Also, HQ Pro, we have a whole course on extensions that Matthew made for us. Either way, there's lots of resources out there for extensions. So I wanted to show a couple of interesting tricks while we still have some time left. And Colin's also mentioning, and I would say Proc Choi, who was Colin in the chat, is probably somebody who, Colin, I would consider you like up there with Noah and, you know, folks who have really gone deep on the Python side of things and have really like taken advantage. Colin, we should have you on the show, bro. I'll send you an email after this. But Colin's mentioning once you have payloads of data you need to pass around the network, having an extension-based system is key to store and route the data. That's a really good point because once you work in extensions, you find you naturally work also with Python storage, and it just really creates a holistic system where, and I think it's hard to say any one particular one is like, oh, well, that one feature is so good, I'll start using extensions. I think you kind of need to commit, get into it, and once you see all the tools you have access to, you'll be like, oh, this is like really sweet. What do we got here? Yeah, Matthew had a good session on extensions at the Montreal TD Summit, so that will probably be on YouTube as well. What do we got here? Okay, so let me talk a little bit about these cool little tricks, and I'll try and explain them from the point of view of what they do and how, as a beginner of getting into extensions, these can be like useful ways. First one is something that I've started doing a bit more recently. And actually I saw, Colin, you mentioned this earlier because I've also been experimenting between TDU dependency and the TDF, the TD functions version. But essentially, like, I think this is a common problem a lot of people have experienced where you're building a project and you know eventually you got to move it between different systems. You know, one day it's got to move from my system to the end system. Maybe I got to move it to the client system. You know, whatever it is, I got to move it at some point. And asset paths become like a really tricky thing to manage in this case. Probably a lot of people have done what I've done previously in the past for many, many eons is maybe do something like make a config file, you know, a real simple CSV. I just have one here, config.csv. CSV file, for folks who don't know, is basically, you can think of it as a table where each row of the table is a new line in the document. and each column is defined by where you put the commas, which CSV, comma separated. So, you've probably seen something like this. I do this a lot. I'll put like an asset variable, and then that way anyone can change that variable quickly, and it just repoints all the movie file intops to a new asset location. The problem that I had with this previously was if you did something like use, man, I don't even remember what did we call it? What did we call this before? Just global Python variables. And this is going to be a throwback for folks. Let me think of the best way to do this. Probably the best way. So, this is like how you would do it back in the day. You would make a base. You would call the base local. You would go into there. You would put a table. And then in this table, you could do, the name of a variable and then, its value. So let's say it's C:/something. You put a null, and I think you named this null variables. And then whenever if folks in the chat, if anyone remembers how to do this, also let me know. I think this is how you do it, because then you could say something like, okay, well, now inside my project I have, and I believe it was var, and then the name of it. So let me do this with asset or asset. Yeah, it's asset. So then you would do something like this, and you'd print it out, and you could get, that value. And then you could do something like put that even in a movie files expression, right? You could say, drop this movie file in. Oh, well, let me do, instead of this, var asset, and then plus /icon.png or something. And you can see this creates this C for \something \icon. Now, if you ever done something like this, or if you've ever even just done similar to this, which is just having a table in your project, probably you've had that experience where you've updated the asset path, and then you're going around the network and things aren't, hold on, wait. So in the chat, you're saying, oh, that's brilliant, but don't do this. Please don't do this. Do the other thing. Do the other thing I'm about to show you. This is the old way, which is the bad way, but it's just for demonstrating the problem. What would happen is that you could go through your network, and even though you updated the asset path back in this table, you're still finding operators where, the asset path hasn't updated, and you're doing things like force cooking different stuff just to get the asset path to update. And that's happening because Python by default in TouchDesigner doesn't have this concept of a dependency. And dependencies are what's really interesting, which is that dependencies force any operator who's referencing a dependable object to force cook when that dependable object's value changes. Now you could say, well, why isn't that the default behavior? Hey, I don't know, that's above my pay grade, but I'll tell you the default behavior is not that. So if you have a table and all you do is something like, whether you use var assets, or you even just say, hey, go to like op table 1 and get whatever's in the first column, first row, this is also not a dependable connection. Now, TouchDesigner is pretty smart, and behind the scenes it tries to say, hey, like maybe I should force cook that thing, but then you're in the middle land of sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't work. Where dependable objects come into play is that they force, like I was saying, they force this cook. They ensure 100% reliability. I shouldn't say 100%, but they ensure the reliability that if the value changes here, any reference to this value also is updated, and the operator is forced to do a cook to actually have like the true value there. Now, what I've taken to doing is kind of combining this idea of what this does, which I think to folks in the chat, that was kind of like the exciting part, like, oh, cool, like, we make a thing once, and then throughout the project, we can do, var assets. Trying to take that feel and combine it with extensions in a way. And the reason it's combined with extensions is because the best way to make a dependable object is with an extension. So in this case, this is a very small component. And I'll tell you, it's literally like 2 lines of code. And we'll just walk through it, and you can see how this kind of works and different ways you might be able to use this. And this is the extension right here. And actually, going back to Colin's point, I'll talk about this TDF create property in a second. But you can see very lean. It's literally the boilerplate. It has an init. Inside of the init, I'm defining a property, and I'll come back to what all this stuff means here. But I'm basically creating a dependable object in the init, and then I just make a helper class or a helper function to update that property if I ever need to update it. That's really it. And I'll come back and explain a little bit of like what's going on here. Why is there an underscore here? What is a property? I'll come back to that stuff in a second. But if you think about it, it's just really 2 lines of code. One that creates a dependable property and one that allows me to easily change it. Then what I can do is say, okay, well, let me make a file in dat. And this file in dat is going to look at my config CSV. And anytime that changes, you can see I have a dat execute. And that just, all that does is run that update asset path function that I had here. And all this file, this dat execute, it just takes what's in this cell, passes it to this function. This function takes that value and just updates the value of that property that I made. Similarly, this execute dat, the only thing it does is just make sure, hey, you know what, when the project starts up, go, update the asset path for me, please. So essentially, like, all of this stuff could change based on your implementation. So like, for example, if you didn't want to use a file, don't use a file. You could do it with just a table here that you update. You could do it with data coming in from the system. So a lot of folks like to use the system name. The system name being, let me go back to about here. This device name, you can update this in Windows, Mac, I mean, any OS, you can update the system name. So sometimes you might want to put like render1 or render2 in the device name. And that way you don't even need a config file. You can just say, oh, okay, well, if it's render1, it's going to be here. If it's render2, it's going to be here. And Colin's saying, yeah, put that on start in the exit in it. Yeah, definitely could do that for sure. I think that's, and I'll say, listen, I'm not the extension master by any stretch. I'm still in very much the camp of, I want to get into extensions in a way that I find is effective for me. And I think that's like an interesting way to observe what I'm doing, is not that these, if you want to observe the best practice, that's like, Noah and Colin in the chat here. If you want to observe like, here's like how a regular human is approaching like, how can I use extensions in like a meaningful way? These are the kind of examples you want, that might be a little bit helpful, at least getting started. So, we got to understand, and this eval, all it does is just shows me a preview of like, what's the value here? What is the value of this asset path? So if we talk a little bit about this idea of a dependable object, so there's 2 ways that you can make this. And actually, I made this component a while ago, which is why I'm using the TDF create property. And this is one way that you can make it. And TDF here is a reference to this TD functions mod. So essentially what it is there's a bunch of Python inside TouchDesigner sys folder. So, if you go into actually, I wonder if I can find it. Let's go into, and folks that don't know, there's a hidden component on the root layer called sys. And if you just type it in the path, you're like in the system. And this is where like TouchDesigner builds TouchDesigner kind of up in here. Or that might even be in UI actually. There might be another hidden one. Yeah, there's another hidden one called UI. And it's always fun to like go into these, because when you get all the way down, you can actually see, where are these down here? Where are these? Which ones are these? Are these guys? Oh yeah. So you can literally see TouchDesigner's UI being built from other elements in TouchDesigner. So that's always like a fun like mind trip here. Like the pain bar is literally this component here. So that's always fun. But I digress. The sys area has TD modules, and there's like a lot of Python stuff in here, helper functions, and that's essentially what this TD functions is calling to. Now this TD functions has another method here called create property, and I'm not going to get into too much of the depth of properties versus attributes or any of that kind of stuff. That's like really more high-level Python stuff, probably even above my pay grade, to be honest, to explain well. But the idea here is that you use this function, you give it yourself, you give it the name of the property, a value, and then this dependable flag, this attribute, is the argument is the really important part, because you could set this to false and you'd get the exact same behavior you get from referencing a table, or you set this to true, and then this would essentially force cook everybody who is pulling this value down every time it changes. Now to Colin's point, actually what I've been trying to do lately is use this TDU dependency instead, and that looks like this. You would say self dot asset path equals TDU dot and I believe it's a capital D, right? Is it a capital? I believe it's a capital D. And then inside of this parentheses, you'd essentially put the value in there. So I could, just for example, say C:/temp. And then I have to update this. So this, I think, is like Colin was saying. And Colin, maybe you can explain why, from your more technical understanding, like why that might be a better thing to do. But for me, I also just think this looks way easier. I haven't really found any innate value to having, or any innate functionality that I get extra from the create property. I just started that way, and now I'm kind of more transitioning to this way. The one thing you need to remember about this, and actually I wrote a quick blog post about this yesterday, which you can see on our blog. You have to be careful when you create this TDU dependency object. That is the object inside of asset path, which sounds like the duh. But what happens is whenever you want to go update that, if you ever do something like this, self.assetPath equals, and then you just assign the new value, what happens is you're not actually changing the value of the dependency object. You're just straight up, you're deleting the dependency object and just putting a string in its place. So what's really important is that if you are using this TDU dependency, and I think I would almost say this should be your default method of behavior in TouchDesigner, is always be as explicit as possible. And in this case, we want to say change the value. Because then behind the scenes, TouchDesigner is smart enough to say, okay, well, you're assigning this value to the value of asset path, which keeps your TDU dependency in check and updates its value at the same time. So I think that's one really interesting use. And I found this to be really cool because in practice, and I'm just going to speed through this a little bit. Feel free to throw questions in chat, by the way. What I found is really awesome about this is before, when I used to use these other methods of, like these table-based methods of asset paths or variables like this, you would have to change the asset path before you open up the project, because if you open up the project first, you'd have all these broken references, and the only way to update them was literally to go and like force cook stuff if it didn't cook. Whereas now with this, it is super hot in the sense that I can open up the project and then realize, oh, I forgot to like change the asset path. Go change the asset path and boom, watch everything force cook instantly when I hit that save button on the file. So I think this is like a really cool, and especially for folks that are just getting into extensions, these kind of things are really good exercises in just getting familiar with extensions, getting them kind of in your life, learning a little bit more about what's going on under the hood, and then trying to find ways that you can expand on that in ways that are like, to be honest, like I said, this is about 3 lines of code that we've written for this extension, and it's very useful. Now, actually, and I just realized the second thing I was going to show is not extension related at all, but it's still an interesting way to think about Python, since we're talking about Python inside of TouchDesigner as well. Now, this one is an attempt, and I'm going to say attempt because I don't think it was 100% successful in the attempt, but this is what, exploring and trying to build more tools under the hood. It's an attempt to create a style sheet for text inside of a project. And actually, I'll come back to that in a second. Colin was mentioning, so if you look under the hood, TD functions is basically just a helper wrapper to create a property. In most cases, you don't actually need a property, but rather an attribute, so it's not really necessary. Okay, so that's great. So it sounds like, the whatever extra functionality that might come with a property is really not needed for most of our cases, and all we want is a value that's dependable. Thanks for answering that, Colin. So this is all too common a problem. You're doing an installation, and it's got like 10 scenes, and they're like, okay, we want a big text here and a small text here. And you end up literally copying and pasting the same text stats over and over again. And then you'll find they're like, can we change all of the big text sizes down 2 points? And you're like, okay, yeah, wait 10 minutes as I run through like 20 operators and change their size. So this was an attempt to kind of bridge a couple of different Python techniques to almost make a style sheet, which then I could template into different text objects. So the way this works, and you can definitely see the train of thought as we're going through it. But first and foremost, inside of each of these styles, which are these bases or containers, I have my text stat. And this is the master text, it's not text that, text top, which sets the style. And so things I exposed, font file, being able to change the font, bold, italic, auto fit options, font size. You can see like a lot of the stuff I decided to expose here. Color, resolution. I even exposed the text, but actually in hindsight, I wouldn't do that anymore. So what I've exposed these to is this container. Now the reason I expose this container, because really in my ideal world, the biggest RFE for me is being able to have global op shortcuts on non-components. How amazing would that be? To just be able to say op.this and literally end up at a text top, literally end up at anything else. But that doesn't exist right now. So I was like, you know what? I really want to use global op shortcuts so that I can easily access these styles from anywhere. So that's why I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to put the text top inside, and I have to reveal all of its settings I want to be able to change easily on the custom parameters. It also gives me an easy place to just come and change the style globally. So then what I did is, now that I have this container and I have style 1, then I made essentially a template, and this is what I copy and paste around my project. And this template basically just uses Python expressions to grab all of the different attributes and kind of properties that are listed here on this container. And the nice thing is all those are really easy because of the, well, easy and resilient to me copying and pasting around the project because of that global op shortcut. So I can literally take this template, pretend I have 4 scenes in my project. Let's just make those real quick. Actually, I'll make 1 first. And I'll copy and paste it a bunch of times. And that error warning you see is just because I don't have the font file. Don't worry about it. But now I essentially have, this real life example of, I have 4 different areas in my network. All of them are using this text styling. Client requested a change. Well, now instead of going to each one of them, the thought process becomes that I just go back to the style and say, oh yeah, you know what? Actually just make all of them like 30 points. And I know that that change is going to get pushed to every single variant, or not variant, actually the variants would be the different styles, but every instance of this that I've created. Now the nice thing is, using all of this being referenced, then it's really easy to say, actually, you know what, I got to override the text here and say this is going to be hello, the next one is goodbye maybe. And then regardless of however I change those styles, so let's say maybe the tracking gets bigger, I still keep essentially the important and unique part of the content on the other side of it, while also getting the benefits of changing that style. Now, definitely not the best system ever. Rajat's mentioning like Python storage could probably be an interesting thing to integrate here. But what I wanted to really show about this is how to approach like the thought process of really trying to get more into TouchDesigner and Python if you haven't before. And I'll definitely be one of those people who, I will admit, I am a resilient to too much Python in my project just because I didn't have a background as a coder. I can do lots of Python stuff, and you'll see in like bigger projects that I've worked on, there's lots of Python stuff. I just don't really enjoy it. So I want to feel that whenever I'm using Python, I'm trying to get bang for buck. Now the cool thing with this is, let's say I wanted to have another style, like a title style. I just grab my style, my template, copy and paste. Actually, what is this? This is a crazy script here. I don't remember what it does. Oh, you know what this does? I think this generates styles. Let me check here. This is my style generator. Yeah, so if I ever wanted to create a new style, I could literally run this script. And, oh yeah, this was, okay. This was a tricky one. This is more like where Python comes in really helpful. So what would happen is if I just copied and pasted these two, you could see that the second template is still referencing the first style. So I was like, oh, well, that's no good. Let me Python my way out of this one. So I made a script where it automatically detects the next number in the sequence by checking against like style 1, style 2, style 3. It finds when it fails, and when it's failed, it's like, oh, that's the next number I can use. Then it makes copies of them. Then it actually moves them down, because if you just make a copy, it like puts it right on top of it, which is very annoying. And then what it does is I made a list here with all of the names of the parameters, and these are their scripting names. So these are like the names when you go into, you know, here. It goes through all of those in a list, and then iterates through essentially updating every single reference to then match the next style name. So basically blast through all of these, changes style 1 to style 2, and then you can run this and essentially just get new templates created. And then what I can do is say, okay, well now style 2 is going to be maybe my like title text, so maybe it's going to be bigger, less tracking, you know, maybe a completely different font. Actually, I have font file. I don't know why I didn't do a drop down for font, but let's say it's red. And then what I can do is grab this template and just start dropping this around my network. And now it's like, oh, there's my title text mixed in happily with my non-title text, and both are easily updatable however I want to update them. So I got a question from Amazing Robot and Sons. You have an old school background in Flash, right? I do not. But your question is, do you bring any of that to your way of thinking into your TD process? I see containers as movie clips. Movie clips have properties like par.tx, etc. That is how I brought that thinking over into TD as far as my process. I think that sounds like a pretty good approach. I'm always of the mindset of bring your previous skills with you. Don't like dumpster your previous, because you've probably gotten very good at doing something. So why not try and take that knowledge and morph it into new knowledge, as opposed to like, oh, let me start again for fun because I'm bored. No, so I come from a music background, and actually the way I think about stuff is not code at all. Actually, it's more like I think about more compositionally and layers, like in Ableton and like clip grids. Like that's how I usually think about stuff, which is not super useful in TouchDesigner, to be honest, because that's not how we work in TouchDesigner. But so let me know if we got any. Oh, and actually, you were saying I wish TD text had rich text formatting options like, you know, B and I and color tags. You're preaching to the choir. There's a lot of folks, and I think Richard actually made an example somewhere you could probably find of using. Essentially, what you do is you put your text into a mini HTML inside of a TextDat, and then you send that to a web render top to render your text, but being able to use all that kind of nice CSS and HTML formatting, and then you can, you know, use the alpha to comp that onto whatever. So with that said, you know, it feels like we've been blasting through content here, but we're kind of at the end of our stream that was originally planned. So by all means, if you got some questions, throw them in chat now. We could take a look at them. Otherwise, we're gonna start to wrap it up here. We had a really fun time talking to Noah. Thank you, Noah, my friend, for joining us again. Noah is a master of TouchDesigner. He's been doing a lot of really cool stuff. I'll put the links in the chat again for Elsewhere's stream, where you can find some of the recordings and see when the next episode is coming up. Sounds like they're looking for funding, so if you know some folks with money, hit up those great folks. Let me see here. Quite a bit of scrolling I got to do. There it is. Okay. Twitch.tv/elsewhere. I'll put that in the chat for folks. Also, if you want to learn more about Noah and Hard Work Party, hardwork.party. Let me think what else we got to do. Yeah, new Python certification. You know, if you are getting into this business and you're looking for ways to kind of demonstrate that you've proven in some way, you know, and maybe you haven't had that kind of experience in the trenches yet, our certifications are a great way to show that you know something, show that you've been tested for something, and demonstrate that you know a lot of these skills, which hopefully comes up and employers are going to be looking at. We're working with a lot of great business partners to make sure they see how important these things are, and hopefully, you know, holy matrimony or something like that. And yes, Patrick put a link there. Definitely check out the HQ Pro. It is the most comprehensive TouchDesigner and kind of resource for our industry to get into it. We support everybody not only with materials, but also through actual daily Q&As on our Facebook group. We got group Zoom sessions we do every 2 weeks. There's a bunch of tools you can use to get started. Oh yeah, okay, so there's two quick things. Okay, one of them is After Party will be on Patchy's. So Patchy, we'll raid you I think that'll be a fun thing. I don't know how to do it. I'm gonna find it out. I'm gonna look, but we're gonna do it. Yeah, and then so HQ Pro full trial. That link is in the Patchy's post. And if you also want to sign up for the newsletter, let me actually send you another link for that. Definitely check out our newsletter. It's free, and you literally get free stuff every week, like free YouTube video, free blog post, everything. The job postings are in there. It's a really good thing if you're in this industry. You get an email every Monday afternoon, and it's got like, here's the cool new jobs that are here. Here's some cool stuff in the community. Here's a YouTube video about something, whether it's Unreal or TouchDesigner. Here's a blog post about something. If I still had hair, let's put it that way. If I still had hair, I'd be all over it. Okay, so Amazing Robot and Sons had a question. I did say I was going to answer it, so I'm going to take a few minutes. Hourly versus pricing discussion. This is a tricky one. And my feelings are changing with time. I'll tell you that much. Because nothing is crystallized in a human. You know, we're always changing. And let me say, young Sorkabi, a younger version of me, was very much a hungry, working on day rate. You know, I didn't even think back then I was doing estimates, because I was just, and that's why I mentioned, like, if you can find people to work with, that's really good, because, you know, I was immediately just being subcontracted, working with like developers way better than me, trying to like learn as much as I could. But then once I started getting my feet into like, okay, well then I made Envoid, and now I'm like a business owner, and like I'm trying to get contracts and stuff. Immediately I went into flat rate, which I think is what you're mentioning with the value pricing, which is client says, I want to do this, and then I say it's going to cost this much. And once I say it's going to cost this much, I can't change that cost unless the client like totally like messes something up or changes something. Now, I love business. I don't know, it's like a thing. I just love talking about money, talking about like taxation. I love it. Talking about contracts, you can see my eyes light up like, oh yeah, we got to talk. Oh, I love it. So I always stayed on that side of things. I always stayed on the, you know, flat rates and value pricing, because my thinking was that, hey, if I can use my abilities in the negotiation to maybe make something seem more valuable than it is, I can kind of make more money that way. You know, I can essentially make my budget bigger and try and make my workload smaller, and the difference is party time, right? That's what the difference is. Now, over the years, that definitely has had some ups and downs. Sometimes you get a sweet contract, straight project, not too much iteration. You come out the other side clean, you get the paycheck, easy. Other times, it goes completely off the rails. And how you end up figuring out how to deal with that is very different per client, because you're gonna have some clients who, when it goes off the rails, they're gonna be like, oh yeah, sorry, it went off the rails, let's make a change order, which is essentially when you add something to the scope. And you see people mentioning scope change, change orders. These are all kind of like words that you'll hear around that. Some clients are not cool like that. Some clients are like, well, you told us you would do it for this cost, so like now you have to do it, and it doesn't matter how much it like changed, like you said you would do it. First of all, those people should look in the mirror a little bit, because that's not a good way of treating people. That's not a good way of treating other people. Secondly, it can end in some really messy situations. Now, I have some friends who, Noah is probably like a great example of folks who really are on the hourly train. And I've slowly been coming around to the hourly train, if I'm going to be real, because what I find is, especially once the projects start to get bigger and bigger, the amount of variance between we nailed the scope or the scope was completely wrong gets greater and greater. And I think unless you have like the stomach for constantly like you have to be a drill sergeant to make sure scope creep doesn't happen. And scope creep is essentially when your client says do A, B, C, and then 3 weeks later like, hey, can you like add D in there too? And then like 3 weeks later like, hey, can you put like E, F, G in there too? That's scope creep. You literally have to be a drill sergeant. Anytime anything changes from the original, you have to be like, nope, absolutely not, like change order. And then it just becomes like a really frustrating situation, because you feel like that person who's constantly just yelling change order and like stopping the momentum of a fun project because things are changing. And that's kind of what you have to be doing. Now, in that sense, as I've gotten older, I find I don't have that energy. If a younger person version of me, let's do it. Let's party it. Let's combat. Let's talk about scope. Now it's like I say it once or twice and I get tired of saying it. And like, you know, and then I'm like, you know what? I just really don't like working with these people. Like, there's just too much scope change. They need to get their act together. But hourly pricing doesn't have a lot of that, because you only charge for work you've done. The client only pays for work you've done. So the concept of a change order almost doesn't exist, because you're, you know, now this is going to be tricky, and I could go on for like days about this, but the tricky part is that this is not the norm in our industry. It's not hourly. So you're constantly going to have people asking you for a flat rate, and you have to tell them hourly, and you almost have to sell them on the idea of like why you want to go hourly. If that's for you, hey, by all means, if you've got the energy to like constantly like monitor scope creep, do change orders, negotiate, like, part of me still loves that lifestyle. Like, part of me still loves that. But the other part of me is like, you know what? I literally just want to get paid for the work I do fairly, and I don't want to constantly have to be the momentum stopper on a project and constantly like negotiating with people. So that's why I think, you know, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to lean more towards the hourly. And the idea of the hourly is essentially like what it is. You say, hey, my price is $80 an hour, $25 an hour, $50 an hour, $100 an hour, $150 an hour, like whatever that price is. And you definitely go check out our blog, because I've written about flat rates and day rates, and you can just take the day rate and divide it by like 8 or 10 hours, and you get the flat rate that I'm talking about. I find that's a simpler way for people to exist, and especially in a community and industry of artists, where I don't think a lot of people enjoy talking about money like I do, and I don't think a lot of people enjoy negotiating like I do. So you hopefully can get away from a lot of that by going hourly, because then essentially what it is client says, hey, we're trying to do this, and you're like, okay, cool, well, let's just get started. And then you communicate with them, and you say, after every week, here's what the hours were, and they're like, cool. And then they tell you, here's how many hours we want to try and keep it under next week. Then you kind of, so you still end up talking, but it's more relaxed. It's less combative, I think. And I think at the end of the day, it ends up being good for both parties. I think clients then end up only paying, they don't feel like they're paying extra. You know, clients shouldn't feel like, oh, well, there's like a buffer in here. Because that's what you have to do. When you do a flat rate, you take, I think it's going to take this long, and I'm also going to add 10% because I don't want to throw the change order flag too early. Like, I want to have a little bit of room to change order. And you don't have to charge that extra 10% if you're doing hourly. You're basically just like, they're just paying for things that you do. And if they want to pay less, then they can just manage their process better and have you work less iterations on stuff. And on your side of things, the nice thing is that you know that you'll always be paid for working hours. Because that's a tough part. You know, if you flat rate and your estimate was completely bonkers, you can't just say, hey guys, I really misestimated, like I'm going to need more money. You're kind of like locked in at that point. And that's the nice thing about hourly is you're not locking yourself in. You're just saying, I'm this much an hour. For every hour I work, I'm going to get paid. And that's like a nice thing, especially in our industry where it's easy for these big kind of companies to put their pressure down on you. And they'll put their pressure down on you good. And if you don't have that, like, a little bit, I don't want to say fight, but if you don't have like that love for negotiation, love for conflict, if you don't love awkward silences, I'm hesitant to recommend you doing flat rates. And I'm almost trying to recommend, hey, do hourly rate or day rate. You know, it's essentially ends up being the same thing. And actually, yeah, there's the amazing robot instead of saying, watch the video by Mike Montiero, which is, you know, I'm part of my friend. I'm not gonna say, I try and keep a very clean mouth on the stream. F you, pay me. There's also another really good one, which is Harlan Ellison. Pay the Writer is like one of my favorite videos on YouTube. And this is actually good. So El Dope is asking a good question, which is that then what happens is when you take these, tell these people hourly, they're going to ask you how many hours it will take. And then you're kind of like in this dichotomy where I think you kind of have to make the call for yourself how to treat that. Like, one approach I would say is you still give them an estimate that says, here's what I think it will take to do the whole project, and you give them an estimate. It's, you know, at the end of it, it's just one big number, and you say, that's my estimate. As long as things stay on course, it'll be that, but I'm still charging you hourly. So take that as an estimate, not as a invoice or you know, a statement of exactly what I'm being held to. That's just for your purposes. If everything goes smoothly and there's not that much iteration, I think it'll be this, but I'm charging hourly. I think that's like probably the best approach at the moment. But it's still kind of the Wild West. So that's why, you know, it's nice to talk about and get everyone's input and opinion on it. But it definitely becomes a very personal thing that you kind of have to deal with. Hopefully, you know, I'll figure out something. I'll figure out a system, and you better be sure it'll be on the blog or YouTube or something. And I would say another good thing is never give clients line items. Hey, sorry, you don't need line items. Tough to hear. You don't need it. You don't know anything about what we do. You don't need the line items. I don't go to a watchmaker, buy a watch, or you know, look at watch prices and say, actually, can you line item the prices like per gear on each one of these? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. Because I don't. Well, I mean, I had a while where I got like watch opening tools where I would just open watches and like look inside for no reason. Don't do that. But you know, it just doesn't make sense. And because the systems that we're making are complex and usually holistic, it's not like you can just look at the line items and be like, oh well, if we make 2 movie players into 1 movie player, can we get it for cheaper? It's like, no, because that changes like the whole entire system. You can't have you need 2 movie players in this system. You can't have 1 movie player. Stop looking at my line items. So I never give clients any line item invoices. And if I do, they're very generalized and all of my items are grouped together. So if I had like all of these development line items, I would just group all of them together and say development, system development, you know, this much money. Or I would, you know, if there was some design stuff I was doing, I'd group all the design stuff together and say design this much money. I wouldn't say like design of this show is this much, design of this scene is this much, design of like the interface is this much. Because then they're gonna be like, oh, well, what if we make the UI? What if we keep the UI real simple? Can it be cheap? It's like, no, because you're not gonna keep the UI simple. You'll never keep the UI simple. Anyways, that's a separate. That's too close to home if you know what I'm saying. Let me see here, just to catch up on chat. You base on hourly, but avoid tight breakdown. Yeah, you definitely don't want to do that. Start tracking your hours just for your own information. Yeah, definitely that. There's no magic way of getting better at making estimates on time other than doing it and constantly reviewing it. So, you know, even if the client doesn't need it, for yourself, say an estimate. It's going to take me this long to build this long to build this long to build this. Start building them. And through the process, start double checking against your estimate. Like, oh, I'm about halfway through. Am I halfway through my hours? Am I way over my hours? Am I way under my hours? And you have to close that loop. And really, I think we got a blog post. We got blog posts about all kinds of money topics on the blog. But you really have to do that closing of the loop to be able to get the feedback from your initial hypothesis based on the real world result. And then you'll find your estimating process becomes better over time. Oh boy. See, if you could send me on a money rant forever, real quick. But thank you everybody for joining us. It has been a really fun one. We got to talk a bunch about Python. We got to see Noah's really cool project. And we got to talk about money a little bit. So it's been, as like I was saying at the beginning, it's been a hot minute since we've done one of these, so I forget how I even end them. Okay, let's get this in. Thanks everybody for joining us. Don't forget to check out the HQ Pro. You can go to interactiveimmersive.io for that. Patchy, we're gonna do a raid to you right now because you got something going on with the Great Mycelium. It was what it sounds like. Thanks everybody for throwing your stuff in the chat. It was a pleasure as always talking to everybody and seeing what's going on. Stay tuned. The next one will be in May. So we're doing the second Friday of every month. I know we missed last month. I think we might even missed the month before. It's been busy, but we're back now. We're good. So second Friday, and call it. Maybe we'll hit you up. Maybe we'll have you as a guest. That'll be a fun one. Get even deeper into Python. So with that said, thanks everybody for joining us.